Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. All these beautiful faces. Good morning in person and online. Welcome to Fall Convocation 2023. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. All right, I'm so excited to be here today. I'm sure all of you are. I could hear the conversations and the excitement in your voices. We have a wonderful day planned for you, and in turn, a wonderful semester I know is going to be had by everyone. My name is Tanika Bird, and I am the new PD coordinator, professional development coordinator for CRC. You all are so kind. Hopefully that continues throughout the 2 years. The last time I was like, oh, good, someone new. But I'm super excited to be here and to lead in a way of professional development and to serve all of you during my time. As we get started, I have the honor of acknowledging the land that we are occupying. So we'll pause now and I'll read the statement. Oh, I should have the clicker, I guess. All right, wonderful. We pause to acknowledge that Cosumnes River College sits on the land of Miwok and Nisenan people. We remember their continued connection to this region and give thanks to them. We offer our respect to the elders and to all Miwok and Nisenan people of the past and present. When I have the honor of acknowledging the land that we're on, I always like to follow that up with some current information about Indigenous folks, either locally or nationally. And so I'd like for us to just briefly for a moment think about our brothers, sisters, and siblings who are Indigenous and are going through the trauma that is happening on the island of Maui. So I see a lot of head nods, a lot of right? So not only our Indigenous brothers, sisters, and siblings, but those that are residing there, when we've heard the news about the trauma of the fires burning buildings, of people running for their lives, of the charred, beautiful landscape, and also of the 100 and plus living souls that have now transitioned. But what we don't often hear about are the Indigenous repercussions of this fire. And so that's what I wanted to just bring to light today. As you are hearing the information about Maui, to be thinking about the Indigenous folks and their perspective. I did have a video clip that I was going to show you, but instead I'm just going to share what was going to be on that clip. And basically it was a CBS story that was done about 2 days ago. And what was said was that they were interviewing a Native person who's an advocate and community leader in Lahaina. And she said that the devastation of that area is not just what happened last week. It has been going on for centuries. That area was the kingdom of Hawaii, led by King Kamehameha III, when he united all of the islands. And so that was a really important place. But after that time, it was colonized and it became a whaling area, it became a plantation space, and now more of a tourist hub. With the devastation, there is this feeling of understanding that the colonization and oppression is real, and that if that space hadn't been turned into a plantation space or hadn't been turned into a whaling village, it would have stayed where it was, which was a very lush and green space. But because of all of the diverting of water and the influx of folks, it now became a desert, and then this occurred. She did tell a story afterwards, though. Their main cultural center was devastated in the fire. And she told a story of one of the elders who had a lot of his artwork and carvings that were in one of the community spaces, that after he was told that all of his work had been burned, he slept that night and had a dream. And he had a dream about seeds. And so he woke up and he told her, I had a dream about seeds. And what I believe that to mean is now we have a chance to regrow. And now we have a chance to start new. So it wasn't about the fact that those things were gone. Of course, that was a terrible tragedy, but it was about what can we do now? And so her perspective when she was talking in the interview was saying, now we hope that we can reclaim what was lost and that the conversations that are going to happen about what's going to be rebuilt in that space of Lahaina can have an indigenous feeling to it that had been lost so many centuries before. So as we move forward in our convocation and we think about our theme, which is communication. No, it's community, connection. I had to think about that. And conversations. It's communication in there, right? Anyway, I'd like for us to think about the resiliency of all Indigenous folks, right? Folks who have been oppressed, colonized, things have been burned to the ground, but still continue to be in community, to stay connected to the land and their people, and to also have to be a part of the conversations moving forward to rebuild. Okay. Thank you so much. So, just reiterating and again, our theme today is community, being in relationship. I challenge you all to think about the relationships that you have here on campus with your students, your colleagues, with other community members, and what relationships you need to renew, you need to build, or maybe even let go, right? Connection, I think of intersections, right? Where are we connecting with folks? Where are we connecting with our students? Where are we connecting with our colleagues? And where are we connecting either the services or the material and content that we're sharing with our students? How are we connecting it to their lived experiences? And lastly, this idea of conversation. Being in conversation is lovely. As a communication scholar, you know I like conversation. It's that it's exchange of ideas. You never know what you're going to get. It may be something that's joyful. It could be painful. It could be frustrating, but it's that exchange and dance of ideas and communication. But always be thinking about the listening piece, right? When we think of conversation, we think of talking, but today is also going to be that space of listening deeply to the information that's shared with us. So I have taken my time. I'm excited for the day. Thank you so much for your attention. And we are now going to hear from Trustee Pam Haynes.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, can I have a good morning, everyone? Okay. Before I start my formal remarks, I've served as a trustee for 24 years plus. And it has been my honor, it's been my pleasure. But I do know our colleges, and I want to recognize a couple of things about CRC. In so many ways, you have been in the front of making change, sometimes even by yourselves relative to our brothers, our sister colleges. And I want to recognize what has just been said around our recognition of the land in which we sit, in which we work, in which we play on. And CRC was one of the first colleges to make a recognition publicly of that. And that's really important because as I serve on the Board of Governors, and as I go across the state at different colleges, everyone is now doing that. But I want you to know that you were recognizing our partnership, our brotherhood, our sisterhood with those Indigenous families and tribes that are still here, that are still part of our community, and make that recognition. And I think that's really important. And you need to give yourselves a hand. So I'm standing in instead of Trustee Wilkerson. She's come down with COVID, so she's not going to be here. And I am delighted to be pitch hitting here. I try to come to CRC at this convocation because it starts off my entire day relative to going to Sac City or any of the other colleges. So I was glad to be here, and I was very delighted to be asked to give remarks. So with that, on behalf of the entire Los Rios Community College District Board of Trustees, I am delighted to be here this morning with CRC faculty staff to help kick off the fall of 2023 semester. As a trustee, Convocation is a day I look forward to because it is a chance for me to welcome all of you back and to recognize the important work you engage in with our students. It is also an opportunity to recognize our colleges for their work to prepare for another outstanding and impactful year here at CRC. And while they may not be here physically, I do know there's a couple that are, we are all here because of our students, those who are returning, and most especially our new students who are enrolling for the first time. For these students, it is an opportunity to make a very good first impression. The fall is particularly exciting as because of our enrollments. Both CRC and throughout Los Rios is showing signs of rebounding, and we are on track to restore to pre-pandemic levels within the next couple of years. We need to give everyone a round of applause. Now, I have to say that makes my colleagues and I on the Board of Trustees incredibly proud, as we know that creating access to our colleges and for our community is at the heart of what we do. And it starts with getting students enrolled. But we also know that enrollment is just the start, because the ultimate goal is for our students to persist and complete. Our colleges, largely because of all of you in this room this morning, help to change lives, help to lift people out of poverty, change the trajectories of entire families, sometimes neighborhoods, and of course, communities. We help people who are often from communities that have been left behind. Once they are, once they are at our colleges, your commitment to meet students where they are, to focus in on their goals, and to design with their experience in mind. It is all of you, our talented, passionate staff and faculty, as well as administrators. You all are the key to helping them achieve their dream by turning that dream into reality. And so, on behalf of the entire Los Rios Board of Trustees, thank you. I say again, thank you. Because it is everything that you do every single day on behalf of our students that we are here. I hope that each of you has an incredibly fulfilling and successful fall semester. And that ends my remarks, but I want to introduce and bring up our Chancellor, because I know he has remarks and a presentation as well. Thank you.
Wow, what a great way to start with these two strong, capable, talented women. Pam, Tanika, will you both stand up for a second? Don't sit just yet. So Pam, Tanika, and I shared the experience with some of others of you here in Ghana last year. And Tanika and Michael, we were actually neighbors for a while. I hope I was a good neighbor. And I'm going to start my conversation taking us back in time a little bit to 1979. So, Pam, you and I have clear memories of 1979, don't we? Tanika, not so much. You were barely around, so that probably reflects the broader group too. How many of you were not alive in 1979? Stand up. Oh my goodness. Wow. This is a young crowd. So 1979 is ancient history. Go ahead and take your seat. We probably have some people who teach history or political science here as well. So controversy seems new, but it's not new. So I'm going to talk about one of the big controversies of 1979. Now think back for a second. What was going on in 1979? You might think the Iranian hostage crisis of 1979. Big international story. Changes in relationship with China in 1979. Other guesses about something that was divisive, pitted people against each other. You had to choose sides. Sounded a lot like today. Sounds a lot like today. Anybody know what I'm thinking about? You had to choose. Were you for rock and roll or disco? Now, let's do the straw poll here. How many of you would have lined up on team rock and roll? How many of you would have lined up on team disco? Okay, kind of an even split. And in many ways, the division is sort of like the divisions that exist many times today. It's somewhat artificial. Where's the line between disco and R&B? Where's the line between rock and roll and how musics are blended together? And the New York Times did a really interesting article about the rock and roll wars and talked about, is it AC/DC? Is it the Bee Gees? And rock and roll, is it Jimi Hendrix or is it Earth, Wind, and Fire? I mean, is Earth, Wind, and Fire, were they a disco band? They did a song called Boogie Wonderland, but if I had to take one band with me on a desert island, it would be Earth, Wind, and Fire. Are you with me on that? Got some fans of Earth, Wind, and Fire? So, not unlike many of the issues today, the battle about rock and roll and disco, if you lift up the hood a little bit, had issues of race, it had issues of class, it had issues of gender. So when I was in middle school, you sort of had to choose one way or the other, which side were you going to be on. And it's hard to think about. People felt so strongly. The culmination of this battle was an event at Comiskey Park in Chicago where a DJ, and all of you who weren't born in 79, others can explain what a DJ is to them. Playing the best hits of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's what a DJ is. There was an event between a doubleheader at Chicago White Sox baseball game to protest disco, and it ended up in a riot. That's what it came to, this disagreement about something that really shouldn't have been an area of disagreement. It should have been an area of unity. Ended up in a riot, and they weren't able to play the second game of the doubleheader. So, not a new thing in some ways. You think about culture wars. That was a culture war in 79. And the idea of us versus them seems to be more potent now than it has been in a long time. You have that sense that in some ways our country is more divided than it's been in a long time. And people seem to be sometimes looking for ways to say, which side are you on? Are you with me or are you with them? So I want to be clear that I'm not talking about some of the really important hard conversations we're having about social justice in recent years. There is a need to have really hard conversations, and we need to be passionate about that. So I'm not talking about important conversations that are tough, but I'm talking about the tendency in recent times for too many interactions to have a toxicity at times, where when we come together, a lot of factors have led to that in the last few years. How many of you were in a Zoom meeting where maybe you or someone else said something in a Zoom meeting that they never ever would have said if they were sitting looking someone across the table? And then remember when we learned the hard way that doing a meeting and having the chat function open was not necessarily the best way to lead the discourse, because the comments in chat could sometimes be destructive. And if you're leading a large meeting where there's chat, you are in an impossible situation, because if you don't respond to the chat, people feel not heard. And if you do respond to the chat, you go down a rabbit hole. So social media has further complicated this toxicity of communication that can impact the kind of communications we have. One of those 3 C's Tanika was talking about that's a focus in communities and conversations. Communication has to be better as we move forward. How many of you have the feeling that in some ways it is the most polarized it's been maybe in your lifetime? If you have that feeling, there's some data that bears that out. There was a survey taken not very long ago that 20% of the respondents, 1 out of 5, did not just think that those they disagreed with should lose, they thought they should die. Think about that for a second, the impact of that sort of polarization. and the impact that that feeling has, where we not just lost the ability to talk to one another, there's a sense that maybe we can't even coexist with people who disagree. But I've got good news. We have a unity of purpose in the work we do that gives us a chance to rise above this world around us that can be depressing, it can be polarized. And when you think about our students, Miranda, I'm going to ask you to come up for just a second. This is Miranda Rakucci. You're going to get to hear from Miranda as your student senate president in a little bit, but I was talking to Miranda before. She is the unity of purpose that we have. She represents that unity of purpose, that you're going to finish, you're going to be an entrepreneur. I think you're going to be hugely successful in business. You're going to transfer to Sac State. And I'll let you go ahead and take your seat. You get to hear from her. So there's better stuff to come. I'll be done, and then you'll get to hear from Miranda in a little while. But when we think about everything we're doing, it has to be about Miranda and our other students. You're going to hear from a student panel later on this morning, too. Everything we do has to be, how do we help our students achieve the goals that they have set? And we have to put aside some of our personal differences at times and remain focused on that unit of purpose, which is helping Miranda and students like her, particularly our first generation students, our Black and brown students, our students who are overcoming tremendous obstacles. We have a powerful unity of purpose. And how many of you have worked someplace other than at a college or university? So my first job, I worked for a few years in a setting where it wasn't a bad job. I got paid okay. But at the end of the day, I wasn't really sure if the world was a better or a worse place. How many of you have had a job like that? It's not that it was evil, but you didn't have that unity of purpose. And then I became a full-time faculty member, and I walked into the class the first day filled with students like Miranda, and that is such an energizing purpose that we all share. Not all of you have that experience directly in the classroom, but all of you are supporting students in really important ways in whatever you do. So that unity of purpose, the clarity of mission that we share, gives us a chance to rise above many of these negative factors that are swirling around us in the world today. And with that unity of purpose, I'm going to talk real briefly about 3 goals that we all share. And I'm going to give you a quiz at the end. The first is to restore. Let's say restore. Second is to maintain. And the third is to ensure. Restore, maintain, and ensure. All right, so we're going to restore access, we're going to maintain fiscal stability, and we're going to ensure equitable outcomes for our students. So restoring access, you heard from Trustee Haynes, some really good news. You think about the awful last 3 years, there's just no denying. A lot of the things that have happened in the last 3 years have been really tough. And our enrollment in community colleges had been slowly declining before the pandemic. I don't know if you knew that, but we weren't growing before the pandemic. And then in March of 2020, enrollment went way down during the pandemic. So we've been working hard. We've had a lot of discussions about how do we restore the pandemic. And the fact that we agree upon the goal doesn't mean that we have total agreement on how to achieve the goal, right? We'll have disagreements about what the strategies are. And the good news, though, is at this point in time, what we have done together, what all of you have done, I want to emphasize the gratitude that Trustee Haynes was talking about. Thank you for the work you've done. In the spring of 2023, we had the largest increase year to year, term to term, in at least 15 years. So 5%, that's a good jump, but it gets better. Summer of 23, up 12%. Summer of 23 to summer of 22 to summer of 23. And the fall semester, we'll have a better idea in the next couple of weeks, but the trends are really good. We're looking at up district-wide more than 8% fall to fall. So let's celebrate that for a second. When our board adopted the goal to restore enrollment to pre-pandemic levels over a 5-year period, that was an ambitious, really big goal. And we're well on track to doing it in less time than that. And we're not going to stop in restoring enrollment to pre-pandemic levels. We have many students in the capital region we need to serve, so we can actually beat our pre-pandemic levels, don't you think? So that's number one. Number one is restore enrollment. We're on track. Number two, thank you, maintain fiscal stability. This is not a glamorous, sexy goal, is it? And it's a little bit like being a utility company where everybody takes it for granted until the lights are not on. Fiscal stability in Los Rios is very easy to take for granted. How many of you have been at statewide meetings and heard about the lack of fiscal stability at many, if not most, of our districts around the state? I see a lot of heads nodding. We're incredibly fortunate that we have a tradition that goes back decades of maintaining fiscal responsibility, and that is a shared responsibility. Our Board of Trustees models it, but all of our stakeholder leaders are a part of that too. And all of you are leaders, but will everyone who serves on the Chancellor's Cabinet stand up? All of your stakeholder group leaders, including President Bush. So it's a shared commitment we have to maintaining fiscal responsibility and fiscal stability. What that means is that when the budget is different than what we anticipate, we're ready for that. Now, when the pandemic began, we, as most organizations, anticipated that would have very negative impacts on the budget, right? You would think a global pandemic would mean that our funding would be potentially reduced. We prepared for that possibility. Well, what happened? Funding is probably at an all-time high. You know, Trustee Haynes has been a trustee for 20 years. We've known each other most of that time. I became a college president in 2004. This is far and away the best budget we've had in the 20 years that I've been a CEO in California. And that's great. Let's celebrate that. It's a great budget. 12% retro, 8% ongoing increase to address some of the increases of inflation. And I know some of those increases are very real and personal, like healthcare increases. But in good times, we have a very organized way of sharing the benefit of good times, and our recognition that if this is the best year in 20 years that I've experienced as a CEO, what are the odds that we're going to have another year like this? Hopefully soon, I agree. But this is probably the best year we're going to have for a while, and we have to prepare for the reality that budgets in California are very volatile, and so much of revenue in California is based on the 1% highest earners and how the stock market is doing. So when the stock market is booming, revenues go up. And also, a lot of the dollars that have gone into our state budget in recent years have been federal dollars from COVID and the pandemic that will not be reoccurring. So we spend a lot of time in the Capitol. We are very engaged with all of the elected officials, and we're cognizant of the fact that the Legislative Analyst Office, which is nonpartisan, is quietly saying the revenues that are predicted are not likely to be received. And the top line, you don't have to read all the print on this, the top line is the governor and the legislature's budget, which is the best case scenario. The middle line is where the LAO thinks revenues will come in. The bottom line is a reasonable variation between the best case and the worst case. We plan for all of those scenarios. We hope for the worst. We hope for the best. That's pandemic thinking. We're not hoping for the worst anymore. Now, see, Miranda, I told you I was going to intentionally make a mistake so you would feel less pressure. So we hope for the worst. We hope for the best. I did it again. Will you say what I'm trying to say here?
We hope for the best.
Thank you. But we plan for and we're ready for it. So that's what we're going to do on the budget side. So we're going to restore, we're going to maintain. Most importantly, we're going to ensure equitable outcomes for our students. So we're great at access right now. We're great at fiscal stability. How are we doing on making sure that every student completes their goal regardless of their zip code, their race, their ethnicity, or their economic background? How are we doing? We got some work to do. We're working hard, but we're not there. We have some work to do. And overwhelmingly, what do our students tell us they want to do? They want to complete. They want to get a certificate, as Miranda was talking about. They want to get their transfer degree. Many of them want to transfer and complete a 4-year degree. So our job is to help them achieve their goal in a way that will dramatically change their lives. The last few years, Pam, you talked about 24 years as a trustee. I started teaching back in 1991. I became a full-time faculty member. So I think between 1991 and 2020, there was a little bit of change in community colleges. Between 2020 and 2023, there has been more change in the last 3 years. Man, I don't want to do the math. I'm old, aren't I? In all those years from 91 to 2020, more change from 2020 to 23. The pandemic rapidly accelerated that change. So what percentage of our courses were online, ballpark, in February of 2020? 15% maybe? March 13th, 2020, what percentage of our courses were online? Well, all of them. Before the pandemic, what services could students obtain 100% remotely? Very, very few. Now, many of our students seek services remotely. They seek courses online. Anybody want to predict what the mix between online and on-ground courses will be in 2 years? What do you think? 50-50? 25-75 which way? So, oh, wow. So you think it's going to continue to go that way? Well, and she said she's a realist. I think the answer is we don't know for sure. What I think we know almost with certainty is that it's not going to go back to the way it was before. We're not going to have 85% on ground and 15 remote. Now, is that good or is it bad? The answer is yes. There are good things about the remote offerings. There are students who simply were not able to physically come on our campuses before the pandemic. We did not have enough online inventory for them. Now we do. There are also students for whom the online modality is not going to work well. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves and figure out which students do well in which modalities. And let's take another step. I know part of your conversation this week is a difficult one. Are there ways that we can do things even better in the classroom? And we need to work really hard about thinking, how can we improve online education for those students who are not successful in an online environment now? Because I don't know if we're going to be much more online, but I do know there's going to be an unceasing demand for remote education for as far as the eye can see. So maybe philosophically we have qualms about that. You know, my kids are 22 and 24. I wish they read books and didn't do everything online, but that, you know, that genie's not going to get back in the bottle. And I think that's true with online education. We're going to have students who have found this modality. They're going to continue to use it. So we have to do it well. So I am very excited as we begin this semester and appreciative of a chance to start a day of convocation, the first of 4. And I want to acknowledge the poor people who get to hear me speak 4 times. Can you imagine listening to me for 2 hours in one day? Everybody from the Chancellor's executive staff who's here, will you stand up? And remain standing for just a second. Carrie, stand up. So our job is really simple. It is to help all of you achieve those 3 goals. That's what we do. Our job is to help you do what you do to help Miranda and our students. So let us know what we can do to help you. You guys can sit down now. And I'm easy to find. If you have thoughts for me, send me an email, stop by. Love to talk to you and talk about how we can help you achieve these goals, because as we start this year, the last 3 years have been hard. We've learned some things. We've gone through rapid changes, but the best is yet to come. Can you say that with me? I believe it. The best is yet to come. So CRC, thanks for spending some time, letting me share some time with you today. And it's literally true. Now that I'm done, the best is yet to come. We're going to hear from. So thank you, everybody.
One more round of applause for the Chancellor and the executive staff. Beautiful, wonderful. So now we are going to hear from our Student Senate President, Miranda Riccucci. Thank you. Thank you. All righty. Hello and good morning. My name is Miranda Riccucci, and I'm excited to serve as the newly elected Student Senate President for the academic year 2023-2024. Oh, I got this. This coming semester will be my third year here at Cosumnes River College. My goal is to transfer to CSU Sacramento. Outside the classroom, I am an entrepreneur who has created a small business, which is an interest that I am pursuing once I transfer. I come from a very diverse family where our differences have brought us closer and where I have learned that we are more than just the sum of all our parts. As someone who comes from the disability community and the proud daughter of two mothers from various diverse ethnic backgrounds, thank you. I am honored to serve the very diverse student body at Cosumnes River College as the Student Senate President. Our differences, unique identities, and experiences enrich our experiences both in and out of the classroom. As I meditate on our journey ahead as student leaders, what comes to mind is reconnect. Although COVID has taken so much from us, it is up to us to come together, reconnect, re-envision, and rebuild. Rebuild the connections between students and faculty, as well as students and the vast resources and experiences available to us all at CRC. Reconnect and rebuild student life on campus, create opportunities for engagement and connection, something we have lost due to the need to attend remote classes online, which has been the result of the pandemic. Reconnect and continue to develop a sense of belonging that will propel all of us to achieve our goals, both academic and personal. Lately, I have been reminded about the quote by Mahatma Gandhi, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And I believe the change we need right now is to once again feed each other. It takes a village to raise a child, African proverb. And I know it takes all of us here at CRC to ensure the success of all students. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to collaborating and learning how the connection and collaboration between student government, faculty, and staff at CRC can help all of our students achieve their academic and personal goals. Thank you. Thank you. Miranda, thank you so much for your wonderful words. Beautiful. And now we'll hear from the Classified Senate President, Miguel Lemus.
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Miguel Lemus. It was a while ago, a few years back, somebody approached me and said, Miguel, if you become the classified Senate president, go ahead and do your speech in Spanish. I was like, why not? But I am not going to do that today. My name is Miguel Lemus, and I'm proud to introduce myself as the new classified Senate president. I currently work in the Admissions and Records Office. As the classified Senate President, it is my honor and privilege to welcome each one of you. This morning, I would like to emphasize three key concepts: conversation, connection, and community. En español sería conversación, conexión, y comunidad. Can you repeat that with me? Conversación, conexión, y comunidad. Conversación. At CRC, it is important that we engage in conversations to understand the needs of our students, to work through the challenges that we may have as staff, and most importantly, to ensure that we listen to each other. Conexión, connection. By having this conversation, we will strengthen the connection to one another, and most importantly, to the students that we serve. Comunidad, community. By doing these two important things, having meaningful conversations and creating deep conversations, we will be able to build a strong and vibrant learning community here at CRC. At CRC, our classified professionals are constantly making strong connections with our students, always engaging in meaningful conversations with them, and in this way, help to build a strong community. Once again, bienvenidos, welcome. And I hope for this fall semester, we as the great CRC community take the challenge of opening up to great and meaningful conversations that will lead to a stronger community. Muchas gracias. And now, I would like to introduce our new classified executive team. If you're here, please stand up so we can recognize you. Myself, Miguel Lemus, Clarissa Correa Hamilton, our Vice President. Clarissa, are you here? Linda Staff, our Secretary. Linda. Trevor Steverson. Trevor. And our awesome past president, Tiffany Clark. Now, I would like to introduce our new members of the community, our new classified professionals. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Forgive me, but I will have conversations with you. And I assure you, I will get your name right. Dalal Abushi, if you're here, please stand up. Jennifer Alvarado. Kelly D. Banford. Jenny Bang. Gurpreet Bhatia. Brandy J. Border. Day K. Ding. Faustino Dola. Antonia Larreinaga. Ka Lee. Derek Love. Jennifer McLean. Carrie Reyes. Lucia Rodriguez. Meredith Stapleton. Ana Tinoco. Evarista Velez. Veliz. Julia Villalobos. And Raymond Whitmore. Thank you and welcome to our CRC community.
Welcome to our classified new hires and board. I am going to introduce the Academic Senate new members and also our new faculty hires on behalf of Jacob Velasquez, their new Academic Senate president. So we have our board here, our leadership for Academic Senate. We have Jacob Velasquez as the president, Lisa Marie Maderos, vice president, Eric Anderson, secretary, and Scott Crozier, past president. Are any of you here that I've read the names on? There we go. Thank you for your service. And now on to our new faculty hires. We have 4 new faculty hires. If you are here in this room, please stand up so we can give you a round of applause. We have Samantha Juner, Emergency Medical Technologies Assistant Professor. We have William Madden, Counselor. We have Brandon Merritt, Athletic Coordinator, Kinesiology, and Health and Athletics Assistant Professor. And then we have Manuel Paul, Physics Astronomy Assistant Professor. Thank you so much. All right, and now we have our remarks from our college president, Dr. Edward Bush.
You love me? Huh? You love me? Yes. You love me? You love me? Yes. 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 I love you. Love me? Yes. You love me? Yes. You love me? Yes. You love me? Yes. You love me? Yes. I love you. You love me? Yes. You love me? Yes. You love me? Yes. You love me? Yes. Only you. Jesus.
Welcome to the best fall semester in the history of Cosumnes River College. Give yourselves a round of applause. I mean, besides being the most adorable video ever, I could watch that 20 times and never get tired of it. As I begin to watch it, maybe in my 20th time, I'm not a child psychologist. There's those in the room that would have much more insight into the behavior of that young lady who continued to ask the question, do you love me? But in my imagination, is my hypothesis that each time she asked, do you love me, was actually a different question that was being proposed. Janet, do you feel me as I'm on the right track? Jeanette? It was, do you love me? Because I think ultimately what she was looking for was the security that love brings. And she wanted to make sure that she will be able to be safe in the presence of her father, because she will be assured that her father loved her. And she wanted to make sure that she drilled into her father's head, literally, at the end of the video, is, was he ready to live up to the responsibility that love brings. Because love brings a responsibility. It is a set of actions. So today I'm going to talk to you around this idea, this thing that love made me do it. I put up this picture for a couple of reasons. Go ahead, get it out of your system. One of the reasons that I wanted to show the picture probably to your right, to your left, is I want you to know that I haven't always been bald. That there was a point in time in my life, no matter how small of a window it may have been, that not only did I have hair, I had lots of hair. I had enough to believe that I could grow dreads on the top of my head. Those are my attempts to have dreadlocks. I was 21 years old, and my wife wasn't my wife at the time. Threw me a 21st birthday party. Been married 28 years. My wife is here. She's in the back, despite my best effort to get her towards the front. I'm going to get a little personal here. I did ask my wife her permission before I talk, but I do have the mic, so this is going to be my version of the story. And if you could catch her when you leave, you could get her version. Been married 28 years. I would like to say that all those years have been totally great. Overall, it's been a great 28 years, but in any relationship, in any marriage, there are seasons. And sometimes we go through seasons. We could argue that we may be in a season right now. We go through seasons. One of the things, though, that we notice and observed in our relationship is that when we are vibing, when we are connected, is when we are in the space we're able to have open conversation and communication, where there's not anything off limits in terms of what it is that we can talk about. And then when we notice when we are not in a good space, in fact, is because there's certain places in our relationship or certain places inside of us that we're not willing to go because it may be too painful or too triggering or too uncomfortable to talk about. So we ignore it and let it go. But beneath the surface, it really doesn't go away. It just continues to fester, and it shows up in behavior, and it shows up of how we greet each other because we haven't dealt with. When we got married, we made a decision. We made a choice. Where more like Janice made a decision and a choice, and I went along with it. But it was agreement. She said, I do not want to be in an average marriage. I don't want to be in an average relationship. I want to have an extraordinary marriage. And in order to do that, I want to practice the idea of radical honesty and radical transparency. Radical honesty and radical transparency. Meaning, I'm going to tell you the truth no matter what. And my wife has thoroughly embraced that idea and that concept. Thoroughly. A truth teller. She said, if I don't tell you the truth, if I give you a compliment, how you know if it's a real compliment? She's like Simon of the relationship, Simon of marriage, Simon from, is he still American Idol, used to be? No, I know it's no longer there. But honest truth is. And that has saved our relationship when we go back to practice, knowing that there's no conversation off limits. Because in order to have those type of conversations, we know we can always fall back on this idea that we love each other and we have the responsibility to always tell each other the truth. We don't have any places that are off limits to talk about. CRC, whether you know this or not, I don't know if I have formally proposed to you, but we's married. We are absolutely married. I'm married to you. I don't know if it's reciprocal. I think about you every day and every night. You are always on my mind. There's no other college I want but you. You are special and you are unique. You make my heart flutter every time I walk on campus. You are the one and the only institution that I would ever want to be in my life. I am married to you. We share a commitment that I hope is based on love. And I don't use that word lightly. I don't throw it around, but I love CRC. And because I love CRC, I love you. And because I love you, I always want to be in a position where you know when I say something, it is the truth, at least the truth as I understand it and I know it, because I want us not to have an average college. I don't want us to have an average relationship. To me, we made a similar agreement as Dr. Janice Bush and myself made 28 years ago. We said that we did not want an average institution. In fact, we said we want to have a what? Preeminent. A what? A preeminent college. But like in relationships, in order to be preeminent, we have to be comfortable to be able to open up and to have difficult conversations. I remember in one of our critical conversations that my wife and I could have while we in a particular season, I got to the point and shared, say, hey, he was checking in with me, like, hey, what's going on? Like something is different. And then I finally said, well, I thought maybe once we hit year 24, I could just coast this thing out. Like, I don't know if I needed to stay radical, transparent, and honest anymore. Like, we got 24 years of foundation of that. Like, can we just kick it and hang out now? Like, do we still really need to talk? Do we still really need to have conversations? Do we still really need to date? I was like, we're good. The kids out the house, they grown. Like, I'm about to relax. And that's not too different sometimes how I think about my work as college president. The last 8 years, y'all, we have done some amazing things together. Like we have moved the needle of certain data points that has never been moved 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We've been able to have 68% of our courses zero textbooks. Where's Andy out at? Shout out. Guided pathways, student success teams, teaching and learning leads, housing grants, 11 federal grants when we had zero before 2014. The list goes on and on and on about the good work that you have done. You have held up your side of the bargain, your end of the bargain in this relationship tenfold. And I thank you for that. So in my mind, I'm thinking, this is year 8 for me. This is my 9th convocation. And going into last year, I'm like, maybe this is the time where I could kick it. they know me, they knew I am, I'm predictable, they know what to expect from me at this point. If they don't know that I love them, they at least know that I like them a little bit. Like, I'm good. Maybe we could coach this thing out. We're not average. I'm not average. Students don't deserve average. I know what I'm going to say next. Sometimes you have these things called dramatic pauses. Let things set in. There's a conversation that we need to have. If you get uncomfortable at all in this conversation, don't blame me, blame love. There has been a barrier that exists in the mind, particularly, I would say, administrators and instructional faculty. And I don't know how real it is, but it's definitely a perception that has turned into reality, I think, for me and others that are looking at ways in which we can improve student outcomes. And so this idea is the classroom is not an area that we can discuss, let alone touch. And because of that, administrators, institutions have spent time and energy, spending resources that should be going into the classroom supporting your work. This is the real implications of that. Will often go outside of the classroom because it is viewed as the path of least resistance. And so we pour money into coaches. We pour money, which is a great investment. Don't get me wrong. We build pathways around how to provide support for students. We do reform of how we onboard students into our institution. But we all know the core of the institution, what matters the most, what makes us a college, is the exchange that happens in the classroom. Teaching and learning is core to everything we do. In everything we do should be about how we are supporting what happens inside of the classroom. And I think as an institution, we have failed to provide instructional faculty with all the support and the development you need to be able to be in position to continue to hone and to work on your craft. And because we haven't done that, I think we continue to see the consequences of that not occurring. I promise you, I'm not going to throw a lot of data at you because in many ways, this is not a data conversation. This is a love conversation. And the reason why I can't coast that when we look at our course success rate, our average course success rate is 68.7%. That's just a point of comparison. That's not a goal. That's not an achievement. This is just what our average is. Then when we look at achievement for our Latinx students, it's 65%. And we look for our African American students, it's 55%. Almost half of the Black students who are taking courses in our institution fail a course. I was going to say in my preparation is that I own this data as college president. but I reframed that quickly in my mind. I don't own the data. Is that I own and am accountable to the students that the data represents. And when our students are struggling in our institution and struggling in the classroom, when they fail, they are asking the question, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me when my computer crashes and I don't have a way to turn in my assignment? Do you love me that I could get an extra day to get my situation fixed so I can submit my? Do you love me enough if I fall behind, I get sent to this thing called academic probation that continues to reinforce my failure, and I'm looking for tools and ways in which I can improve as a student and hone my skill sets? Do you love me? I'm struggling to buy my books or to pay rent, and my books cost $120 per book, and I have to make a decision to pay for rent or buy a book. Do you love me? Do you know my name and call me by my name when I walk in the classroom? Do you see me? Do you affirm my presence? And do you affirm my presence enough that I can see myself when I read the materials you assign? Do you love me? Do you love me that I'm learning information and content that is going to improve the situation when I get home, that I could apply what I learned and immediately take that to my family and community to begin to solve the problems that exist where I live? Do you love me? These numbers does not reflect the genius and brilliance that exists in our students. And so love puts us in position not only to own the data, but to love and to see and be accountable to the student that's behind the data. One of the things that I've learned and learning in being married is that to have a conversation about who's at fault or where we place blame is fruitless. That only produces a form of guilt, resentment, hopelessness, because you feel like I hurt someone that I love, and it's difficult sometimes to overcome that. Similarly, here, this is not a conversation about blame. It's not a conversation about fault. There's a lot of factors, a lot of variables that goes to produce this numbers and some other numbers that I'm going to show you. So don't leave here, because it's not my intention, nor is it in my heart, my mind, or my spirit to say this is the fault of any faculty member in our institution. I'm not saying that. And if that's the story you leave here, that is a lie. But this is about, just like we do in any relationship, how can we be in partnership? How can we be connected enough? How can we support each other enough that we will be able to lift up, to improve outcomes? Because it's more than just course success rates. It's what course success rates represent for our students. If they don't pass a class this fall semester, it's likely that they're not going to enroll in the institution the next semester. if they don't enroll in the institution next semester because they didn't pass a class in this semester, then they're less likely to walk that stage in 2 to 3 years. And if they don't walk that stage in 2 to 3 years because they didn't pass a class in this semester, then they're not likely to be able to go out there and earn a job that produces a livable wage. And if they're unable to get a job that's not producing a livable wage because they didn't pass a class in this semester, then they're not going to be in a position to be able to break their families out of a cycle of poverty. They're not going to be in a position to be able to pass on the knowledge and the information of what it's like to navigate their way through school. So their children were not likely to go to school themselves if they didn't pass a class in this semester. So it's more than one class. And if only 68% of our students is passing, if only 65% of Latinx students are passing, if only half of African American students are passing, then it's no wonder we see the societal statistics that we see. It is all connected. Another data point. So in the fall, looked at the average success of faculty who regularly taught over the last 5 fall terms. And so comparing faculty teaching the same course, and we're going to talk about the variance that exists. So same course, different faculty. So the average difference, variance in success rates between those who had the highest and lowest success rates, 16.5%. Varies. The largest gap difference is 53.6%. We're going to talk about what that means once that to settle just a little bit. As you yourself begin to think about own implications or what that means. Same course, different instruction. And, of course, I had some chance to kind of talk this out a little bit in my head and with others. And folks was concerned for me having this conversation. I had a chance to share with some of your colleagues. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. And in my mind, they were saying, good luck with that. And I began to get in my own head. I was like, ooh, how are you going to message this? How are you going to front load it? What words you going to say? How are you going to make sure that people are not going to feel blamed? How are you going to let them know you understand the conversation that needs to be had about standards and rigor? So all these things going through my mind, and I had to say to myself, stop. Stop. I love these people. Stop. I'm committed to this place. Stop. We got folks who have professional pride and passion. Our faculty show up every single day. Our classified professional shows up every single day with the best interest of their students in mind without question. So let's just have a conversation. Let's be honest. Let's practice radical honesty and transparency. Because if I'm not genuine, that's going to be the problem. If you think I'm trying to be on message, that's going to be an issue. But right now, we have a situation that our students' success is often determined by which class they get or who they don't get. And so it's by accident. So whatever lack of preparation our students come with, whatever deficiency you believe that they have, it is equally dispersed across these same sections, but two different set of outcomes are occurring. 53% variance from a course to a course. Conversations we just need to have. And it's my hope. In fact, it is my prayer that we feel like we have evolved enough as an institution, that we feel secure enough as a college, that we feel loved enough and feel enough love from each other, that we would go back, pull up our computers, and begin to look at our data. You have access to your course success rate. Let's ask ourselves the question, is there a pattern of success? And also, is there a pattern of failure? And if so, why? And if so, is there anything that I could learn? Is there anything that I could glean? Is there anything that I can reflect on? Is there anything that I could be more thoughtful about that can make a difference? Not in your classroom, not in what it is you teach. That's not the difference that I'm talking about. The difference that I'm talking about is kind of make a difference in the lives of the students that is in this classroom, that would change their trajectory for the rest of their life. Not passing them for the sake of passing them, not reducing expectations, because when you love someone, expectation only grows. You're able to raise the standard because they feel secure, because they know you love them. And when they know you love them, there's no content, there's no concept that the students would not master. I know I'm telling the truth, whether you believe me or not. That's a fact and book. Love allows you to receive that protection. You're in a position now where they're opening enough for you to draw out of something that they didn't even know existed. And total of 3,220 of our students, 23% out of the 13,000 plus students we had in the fall courses for which the instructor had the lowest course success rate. But we're not talking about one or two students. 3,200 of our students are in courses that have the lowest student success. And if I had to hypothesize, and Paul is here to ask him later if my hypothesis is sort of accurate. Paul always comes flying fresh to convocation. His bow ties be on point. and while we on Paul, let's give it up for our research team in general. We got the best research team, period. Just hands down. Period. My hypothesis is if we just aggregated that 3,200 students, I think we would see a connection and correlation to the disaggregated outcomes and course success. I'm not gonna look at Paul in the eyes because I can't handle being wrong right now. We'll practice radical truth right after this. My big sister, who's also my pastor, says this about love. She says that everything that authentic love touches, it transforms. Everything that authentic love touches, it transforms. What that means to me, that no matter how our students show up or what conditions they show up with, that when we practice and operate and lead and teach and serve from a place of love, it means that they, along with their condition, along with their lack of preparation, along with their academic deficiency, along with their lack of motivation, will be transformed into the student that excels in everything that he or she does. That's what transformation is. That if we practice authentic love, that 1 year from now, we will be looking at a whole different set of outcomes when we're looking at course success rates, because we can transform and move those numbers because we're practicing and operating from a standpoint of authentic love. And so when the students, just like the little girl, begins to say, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" You can say, "You graduated, didn't you? Do you love me? Do you love me? You transferred, didn't you? Do you love me? Do you love me? You passed my class, didn't you?" Because we have the power to transform, because we're willing to have a difficult and honest and hard conversation. And there's nothing off limits for what it is that we could talk about when the lives of our students are at stake. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. You will have more opportunities, more ways to be able to engage in this conversation. Stay tuned. Hope you lean into it, embrace it, push for it, and ask for it. Have conversations with your colleagues. Share your data with them. Use it as an opportunity to continue to learn, continue to grow, for us to continue to get better. My pleasure to introduce the new managers and give some energy for new managers. I would ask, we don't have photos this year, so I would ask for all the new managers that's on this screen to please stand. We have Brianna Ellis, Associate Dean of Student Engagement and Equity. Tadel Emeru, Interim Vice President of Student Services, Institutional Equity Research and Planning. Chris Hubbard, Dean of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources, Health and Human Services. Hong Fong, Interim Associate Vice President of Student Services, yes. Tyler Rollins, Dean of Business and Computer Science. Emmanuel Seguike, Interim Dean of English and Language Studies.
All right. Where else can you hear a message about love and data? Where else but at CRC, right? So amazing, right? So we have a 10-minute break. We'd love for you to just stretch your legs, have some conversations, some connections, build community, right? But only in that 10-minute time. And then please come back. We have more to offer today and to hear from our keynote speaker, Dr. Garcia. So we'll see you back in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of work and test, and it's helping folks. So that's the important thing, right?
Hello, hello. Folks, if you want to start finding your way to your seat, if you can hear me outside, start making your way back in. Thank you, thank you. Que ya se vengan. All right, folks, if you want to start finding your seats, I know we're all excited to connect, but you're going to be even more excited to hear about our keynote speaker. Brian, sorry to put you on the spot. You're the owner, you're the host. Would you mind telling people to start making their way back here? All right, let's start coming back in. If you be a good colleague, if you see some folks outside still, tell them to start making their way back in. Don't make me bust out my Spanish right now. Que se regresen, dice mi mamá. I know. All right, everyone, come back in, please. I know I'm don't make me go mommy mode on you because I can't. I have a 5-year-old. So I know how to get loud to just make my voice heard. Sabrina, is there still more folks outside? Okay. All right, everyone. How's it going? How are y'all doing? Yay. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Gladys Sanchez Pantoja, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Dean of the Library and Learning Resource Center and other duties as assigned here at Cosumnes River College. How's it going? Before this, I had the pleasure of also working with the Mikasa program in the HSI grant, because if you didn't know that or you just learned about it in recent presentations, we have the honor of being a Hispanic Serving Institution, or HSI. So yay, CRC. And I know I said this over and over and over again, but it is not just with the grant. The designation is something that we are all part of. We're all HSI. I want to hear you. I want to hear you like you believe it. Say it. We are HSI. That's right. Remember that when you're hearing our amazing keynote speaker, because we do have, you all don't know, but she is like the madrina, godmother, for those of you that don't know Spanish, of HSI and the HSI work in higher ed. So this is like not only a treat and a pleasure, but just like a personal honor to be able to introduce her, just like amazing Shiro of my life. So I will read her bio just so that you know all of her, amazing accomplishments and everything that she's done. But take it from folks in the community, she is the real deal, amazing, and what she has to offer. And the research and the work that she's done in the world of HSI is just amazing. And I know that she will create some inspirational work to make sure that we continue the work and we do it with love, like Dr. Bush said. So I'll go ahead and start our bio. So Dr. Gina Ann Garcia is a professor in the School of Education at UC Berkeley. Woo woo. We just sold her back because she wasn't here, but she came back to the West Coast, which is the best coast, if you ask me. Her research centers on issues of equity and justice in higher education, with an emphasis on understanding how Hispanic serving institutions, or HSIs, embrace and enact an organizational identity for serving minoritized populations. She explores the experiences of administrators, faculty, and staff at HSIs and the outcomes of students attending these institutions. As an equity-minded scholar, she tends to the ways that race and racism have shaped institutions of higher education. Dr. Garcia is the author of Becoming Hispanic Serving Institutions, Opportunity for Colleges and Universities, for which she won the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education Book of the Year Award in 2020. Woo-hoo! And the editor of the book Hispanic Serving Institution and Practice, Defining Servingness at HSIs. And in her newest book, Transforming Hispanic Serving Institutions for Equity and Justice, was released in spring 2023 and is now available. And I want to believe that we have some at the bookstore as well, but you can find her amazing book everywhere. She has delivered over 150 public lectures and workshops across the country and consults directly with HSIs to work towards organizational transformation. She's also the host of popular podcast, ¿Qué pasa HSIs?, which is great, so follow it, and founded the Cal HSI Center, which advances HSI research that informs practice and policy. Dr. Garcia graduated from California State University, Northridge, with a bachelor's degree in marketing, the University of Maryland, College Park with a master's degree in college student personnel, and the University of California, Los Angeles, with a PhD in higher education and organizational change. She is a proud alumna of an HSI and was a Title V coordinator at Cal State University, Fullerton, which drives and motivates her research and practice. I got winded here because she's done so much, but again, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you all Dr. Gina Ann Garcia.
Thank you. Good morning. Didn't have sound. So we're probably gonna take off the earrings, huh? Because they're clacking. We were having trouble getting it on. I might just take this one on. I'm gonna take off my earrings. Yeah, I'll use the handheld. So on Wednesday, I don't know, a day this week, I was giving a keynote and I was talking about hoops and lipstick and heels, which are part of my identity. And then I was like, oh, in my mind, I was like, oh, I didn't put my hoops on today. I was like, I don't have hoops on. I got so concerned. I went and got my bag. I was like, y'all, I forgot to put my hoops on today. So it is important, right? It is important. And everything I talk about today is going to be about the fact that we need to acknowledge people's humanness and their identities and who they are in the work that we do. So thank you for having me here on this Friday, beautiful morning, and for giving me the opportunity to speak with y'all today. I am going to talk about this idea of being an HSI. I'm also going to talk a little bit about NAPZ, since I know y'all have the NAPZ designation as well. And there's a lot to be said about both designations and how you can work with both of them. So I will talk about that and give y'all a lot of food for thought. So thank you for being here and for engaging in this work, because it's important. If you want to follow along the presentation or have the presentation for later, that QR code will give you access to the presentation. So feel free to pull it up now. I was going to point at it, but I don't seem to be. Oh yeah, there it is. So the QR code, feel free to, if you want to access the slides. There's lots of words on the slides. I won't say most of the words, so you might want to look at the words later. So feel free to access the slides if you want. And then all my contact information is here. If you want to follow along in the HSI conversations, ¿Qué pasa HSIs is one way. ¿Qué pasa HSIs is a podcast, what I say, every episode, a podcast where is dedicated to all things HSIs. And so when I say all things HSIs, I mean like everything. We're talking about it. I was listening to an episode this morning for the fall season, and it's about mathematics and changing mathematics with some really dope scholars doing some really cool critical work around mathematics and disrupting white supremacy and heteropatriarchy within mathematics and how that connects to HSI. So you're going to want to listen. It's good stuff. Yesterday's episode I was reviewing is about anti-Blackness at HSIs. Also good stuff. Not anti-Blackness, but good information. Anti-Blackness, not good at all. And so we talk about why we need to address anti-Blackness at HSIs in the episode. That's what Dr. Whitney Pirtle at UC Merced. So get past HSIs. You know, Whitney Pirtle, she's dope. So just that alone, you should just listen. That's episode 1, just to get listeners back engaged with the conversation. So yeah, that's one way to follow along, but there's a lot of work going on. So if anything that I talk about today, you're like, I want to know more, I'm sure there's more, because there's plenty for us to think about this HSI designation. So I'm going to go ahead and get us through, but first, one more plug, all the plugs up front. So I talk about HSIs through this large construct of servingness and about thinking about it at a theoretical level. A lot of the work, I have to say, though, has been done with four-year institutions. And there's a push to start thinking more critically about what it means for the community colleges. So myself and Dr. Cuellar, Marcela Cuellar, and one of her former grad students, one of her current grad students, we wrote this report for the Center for Race and Equity, and it centers Hispanic serving community colleges in California. So everything in the report is about the 107 HSIs of the 150. And we basically do a call to the community colleges and say, like, if y'all ain't doing HSI work, you're kind of falling behind the fact that your whole system is now a Hispanic serving system, right? Besides the 4 that aren't yet, we put the data in there and they're all up over 20%. So they're all very close, even the ones that are almost there. A couple are like borderline, like 24% HSI. So if you want to learn more about that report, you can access the report, but we're also going to be talking about it on Wednesday. This next coming Wednesday, we'll be talking specifically about the report and the data that we found about what's going on with the Hispanic serving community colleges. So HSIs, what is an HSI? How many of y'all think you know? Like if I give you a quiz, you're like, yeah, I know what an HSI is. Okay, there's a couple of there's always this. Like, I think, but I don't know. What if she calls on me? So let me just put my hand down low, right? That's why and then one person's like, pick me. That person was over there. I could pick you if you want. That person has read already books and articles and listened to Que Pasa HSIs probably. So there is a lot of knowledge out there. But if you don't know, you were down here, you're like, I don't know what HSI is. All good. I'm going to give you the rundown on HSIs. So HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, this is a federal designation. That's important. It's a federal designation. Since 1992, the federal government has acknowledged that colleges and universities, nonprofit colleges and universities that enroll at least 25% Hispanic students need additional support to serve underserved students, which is Hispanic, Latinx students. The designation came out because of a lot of advocacy work. So it didn't just, the federal government wasn't sitting around like, hey, we should give some money to under-resourced institutions. They didn't do that. That's not usually what happens. Usually people advocate and say, we need more resources to serve this population. And that's what happened. So since 1992, and at that time, I forget the exact data, but there were maybe 186, less than 200 at that time, that could have met the 25% enrollment. We're now at 571. So every year you can expect the number of HSIs to increase anywhere between 10 and 30 typically. There's that many HSIs coming on board. Now, to give you a comparison, how many of y'all think you know what a historically Black college and university is, HBCU? All right, more hands typically, a little bit of this. Did any of y'all watch Beyonce's Homecoming? Yeah, all right. I know there's some people in the Beehive up in here. Come on, it's okay. Go ahead and think about that as a reflection of HBCU culture. Right. So we see it in mainstream media. We see HBCUs. Our president, vice president, Kamala Harris is and former senator, right, of California, is a product of an HBCU, right? Like a graduate of an HBCU. We know HBCUs. Those of you that are old enough to remember A Different World, remember that? Mm-hmm. Same, I remember. What an amazing show, right? That centered HBCUs. We don't have any of that at HSIs. So we're not seeing it in a mainstream level just yet. I'm, trying to get in contact with Bad Bunny, see if he could do a concert maybe. Perhaps. Maybe Becky G. She's down with the folks. Becky G's pretty down. She would probably do it to get like some knowledge and some awareness around HSIs, because we don't yet know what an HSI is. Now, should we? Absolutely, because 571 actually equals 19% of all colleges and universities. So at this point, I say if you're not an HSI, you're gonna be an HSI. If you look at your data, or we look at the data of who's enrolling in K through 12 schools, there's large percentages of Latinx, Latine people. It's a very, very young population, right? But we also are seeing in HSIs just people of color in general, right, enrolling in HSI. So this is not a construct that's going away. So folks that are jumping on board and thinking about how do we define HSI, that's where we're now at with this work. Now I say, how do we define it? Because beyond the federal designation, 25% Hispanic enrolling and 50% low income, those are the two big major requirements. There's also resource requirements in there that you have to submit data to show that you do need the resources and or under resources. Besides that, there's no meaning attached to being an HSI. Zero meaning. So until myself and other folks started talking about what if there was meaning, what if there was more than a federal designation, there was no meaning around the federal designation. So this is our work. This is the advocates of HSIs pushing this idea that HSIs can be something more than a federal designation. Because when you say you enroll 25% and therefore you're Hispanic serving, people give you a side eye like, really? That sounds like Hispanic enrolling. Sounds like you enrolling a lot of Hispanics. It don't sound like you serving them, because as your data show, they're still going out the back door. So we ain't serving them, right? So we clearly ain't serving them. We are clearly, by the data, are not serving Black students either, right? And sometimes your students are both of those things at the same time. Let's be clear, right? Because people get all wrapped up in Hispanic serving like, oh, then we're not serving other folks. I'm like, Black people are Hispanic too. There's Afro-Latinos, okay? There is. And we need to acknowledge that, right? And there's mixed raciality, and there's folks that are Asian and Latino. There's white and Asian, white and Black. I mean, I don't have to tell you all the combinations of students that are showing up, right? And hey, we still aren't serving them well, right? We still historically are not serving them well. So that's why we have gotten into this meaning making around HSI. What if HSI was something more than a federal designation? Because a federal designation just doesn't do much for us besides provide funds. So that's important. So this funding up here, the Title V, A and B, and Title III, and NSF also has some pretty big dollars for HSIs. Those dollars are important. Those are often seed money, big seed money, a couple $1 million sometimes, to do good work, to get the ideas flowing, to have us try things. Now, what I see with those grants is sometimes we don't try super innovative things, yet the reality is those grants allow you to be very innovative. There's no restrictions, like let's say a TRIO, anybody ever work in TRIO, maybe our EOP, they're much more restricted. Like you have to do what is outlined in the services and the programs. HSI says dream big. Or as I say in my Transforming HSI book, freedom dream. Dream about freedom, dream about liberation, dream about educational liberation for students of color. Dream about this space being so liberatory that they go out and tell all their friends so that they increase our enrollments because they had such a good experience. Right? That's when we know we did go work, when they tell, and for Latina students, we know the patterns actually is they don't tell their friends, they tell their cousins, their little brothers and sisters, sometimes the tias even, right? Like it's not just young people going, right? It might be your tias, abuelas, mothers sometimes, right? Y'all see that in the community colleges, right? Where there's like the mom and the daughter, right? Or whatever pairing it is, enrolled at the community colleges together. That's beautiful, right? So what is how do we create that experience so that people go out and tell all the folks, it was so good, you should go there. Right? Because that's the best form of promotion, is for your students to have a good experience and go tell other people, right? More than anything else we can do. So that's why we are thinking about this HSI work. Now, the reality is this work is hard because of the diversity of HSIs. So there's many types of HSIs. They're in 30 states and Puerto Rico. They are large, they're small, they're public, they're private, they're 2-year, they're 4-year. They have different missions. I'm at a campus now, UC Berkeley, that is a striving HSI, trying to be an HSI. I giggle because that elitism gets caught up in that HSI stuff. It's kind of working against it. Like we got to actually be willing to open the doors. Because if you open the back door, you'd have a bunch of brown people walking through the door, and black people walking through the door, right? It'd be like, you gonna let us in? All right, we come in. Not that we don't want to be there, it's that we ain't being let in, right? So it's funny, but I diverge. So UC Berkeley, as we think about our progressive work towards HSI, and now that I'm there, the conversation is like, how do you be a Hispanic serving research institution? That means your faculty that are there that are doing research and bringing in research dollars, it should be centered on students of color, on Latina students, on doing research with and for Latina communities. That's what being an HSI research institution is, right? Now for the community colleges, that looks different. Right? So what does it mean for a Hispanic serving community college, right? Serving communities historically broad access, right? Historically opening the doors to anybody and everybody that wants to come to higher ed, right? But then also historically have struggled to then graduate them and move them on into transfer spaces, right? And there's a lot of reasons we know that. And so the mission of the HSI also matters a lot. So it makes it hard to just say, well, what is another HSI doing? Let's just do what they do. Because higher ed is known for doing that. We're like, just show us the best one and we'll do that. We'll copy it. Y'all know it, right? Like, show me the blueprint and we'll copy it. Well, the news is there's no blueprint because nobody's figured out HSI. People ask me all the time, oh, you got a question?
So I do have a question.
Okay.
I do have a question. If you don't mind slowing down your presentation just a little bit, the interpreter's having very hard time keeping up with you. And I'm serious. I'm only getting half of what you're saying. We're talking, yeah, I'm sorry, but if you don't mind slowing down a little bit.
Thank you. You're the first person to call me out this week. I appreciate it. You know that nobody else is following. Everybody else is only getting 50% too, by the way. So it's everybody because I talk that fast. Okay, I'm gonna slow down. Slow down. Interpreters, they always be yelling at me. Can you talk a little slower? We can't interpret that fast. So the mission, right, of the institution is such an important thing. So for the community colleges, it really is, how do we become the best Hispanic serving community college? Right? Because as I was saying, there is no blueprint. So don't expect for you to just be able to find the best one. Now, are there some Hispanic serving community colleges in California doing good work? Yes. We highlight a few of those things in the report. Are there some that you could learn with? Absolutely. That's one of the things we actually recommend in the report is that the HSI, Hispanic serving community colleges, should do better collaborative work and start like cross-pollinating, right, ideas, because there are some campuses that have been very successful at implementing and moving the needle when it comes to HSI. So, but this makes it hard. The reality is the diversity. Now, the other thing I like to talk about is the profile of students. So the red bars up here, that's on average the number of Latinx, Latine students that you're going to see at an HSI. And it varies, obviously, every campus is different. But on average, let's say a four-year private institution is rolling 60%, right? 60% is a lot. And I work with a private HSI in Illinois, and they're at about 65%. Right. So yeah, there is a very high enrollment in the four-year privates, four-year publics. We're at about 50%. The Cal States here, all the Cal States except one is not an HSI. Anybody know what the one is? Cal Poly. Yeah. Somebody's always, you must have went there. Cal Poly. So white. Cause choking on it, choking on the whiteness. Ugh, just kidding. I work with San Luis Obispo. They're trying to do better. The reality is, when you're a person of color in a white space, you know it. You know it. You don't have to be told that this is a white space. You just know, right? So San Luis Obispo, if you went to school there, you know. But they're working really diligently to become the 23rd Cal State that is an HSI. So that's good stuff. So the students, besides your Hispanic students, we're also seeing a large percentage of other students of color. Black students are enrolling in HSIs. It doesn't mean Hispanic only. It means Hispanic serving, and we're going to talk about what that means to serve our largest racialized group on campus, but it doesn't mean that we only serve this group, right? That's such an important conversation because people get caught up in that alone. That it feels icky or weird to say we're Hispanic serving because now it feels like we don't serve other folks, right? And so my answer to that is actually this. For one, your students aren't only Latinx, Latine, they are Black, they are Asian American, they are white, they are Native, right? So there is diversity here. That's the cool thing about HSI work is the campuses are some of the most compositionally diverse campuses in the country. So HSIs are like, if you want to do good work with diversity, this is the place to be. This is the place to do it. If you're committed to diversity, I bet if I look at your mission, it says you're committed to diversity. Everyone's committed to diversity. You already have diversity. Cool. Let's commit to equity. Let's commit to social justice. Let's commit to disrupting racism, right? There's so many more things to commit to because diversity, you have it based on the data, right? But the other thing I like to talk about, besides the fact that, yeah, there's lots of different students at an HSI, and so it's not Hispanic only, but also the intersections of your students. So by definition, low-income students are enrolling in HSIs. That's part of the definition. So we now have racially minoritized students, ethnically minoritized students who are also low income, right? I don't have to tell y'all that. Y'all know who your students are. We know this, right? Which we know then brings a bunch of other needs, right? Basic needs is a big conversation right now, right? How are we going to serve our students at basic levels because they have basic needs that aren't being fulfilled, and the low income part of it is an important part. But I encourage you to think about that as intersectional rather than let's only focus on our low income. We call that out in our HSI research. When folks do not center Latinx, Latine students in their HSI work, and they only think about low income and only think about first gen, that's what we call race neutral or race evasive or Latinx evasive, meaning we're not gonna acknowledge people's racialized experiences. We're only gonna acknowledge their low income or first gen because that's neutral and folks can get behind that. So I encourage you not to go down that path, but intersect it. Because the intersection is actually really important, right? That's where intersectionality comes in. Your students might also be, anywhere in the diaspora of immigration. They might be new arrivals. They might have been U.S. born. They might be 5 generations in. They might have been here. They might be the ones that say the border crossed us. That kind of long generational connection, right, to the land. And so there's lots of different types of folks, right? Some might speak Spanish, some might not. There's such a big conversation about how we serve people linguistically, and that's hard because your Latinx population is so diverse that some speak Spanish, but some don't, right? Some speak any number of other languages as well. And so it's such a complexity to think, how do you serve a population that's so diverse, right? Which is where I bring in the equity conversation. I think equity is such an important part of this. I don't say equity's out, servingness is in. I say equity is in the servingness framework. So we're going to do equity work as part of HSI. I call HSI a racial equity project, meaning it is about equity. So how are we going to start to disaggregate our data? Thank you for talking about data, right? And how the fact that data should be driving our decisions, right? Because if we see that a certain group is struggling, that's where the equity conversation comes in. That's why data are important. I had an interesting conversation yesterday. I was at Compton College yesterday, and there was somebody that raised their hand and said, our Latinas do really well here. Like our women, Latino identified, but they still have needs and we don't tend to them because they're not showing up in the data as needing. And I was like, ooh, say it again. So this person went on and on and on and on. And then basically at the end of it, I was like, so what you're saying is Latinas are successful because they're resilient, despite the fact that we aren't necessarily supporting them. So, and she was like, that part, right? She's like, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So we've put all this energy into men of color programs, which we should, because the data show us our men of color are not entering and or leaving the institution. So we do want to support our men of color, but also don't want to completely forget that also some groups are still excelling, but that doesn't mean that we're actually serving them well. Right? So then it gets really complicated because we're saying data-driven, and the data would say your Latinas maybe at this campus as well are doing well, right? But they might be struggling, right? right? So making sure we're tending to the needs of folks and knowing what they need. And then there was a big conversation, not to say that all Latinas have children, but children came up, right, as a potential thing. Like, are we serving our women of color? And we know men and non-gender folks have children as well. But it was a big conversation for folks, right? It's like, how are we serving students that have children and or caring for other folks, right? Because it's not always just children. So the intersectionality, it's big, but it's also really hard, right? Because then it makes it really hard. Is like, how are we going to do this work? Now, I wanted to make sure I brought in our the Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving construct as well. So the Anapeasy, since y'all are at Anapeasy as well, this then also makes it interesting and fun work. I love the dual designation. The dual designation is something that the federal government needs to do better about acknowledging, because the federal government makes you pick which designation you're going to pursue. Certain federal dollars, not all, but certain federal dollars you can only pursue for either Anapeasy or for HSI, but not both at the same time. So it gets complicated, but not impossible. And I want to make sure, to say that like we can be both and be dually designated, particularly when we think about the fact that servingness, the way I talk about it, is servingness is happening whether you have federal grants or not. Okay, so servingness is going to happen because if the federal government at some point decided no more money for MSIs, you still have a large percentage of students of color enrolling on your campus. They're not coming because you're getting federal dollars, they're coming because they're coming, right? So the federal dollars just give us some money to play around with and try new things and innovate and dream, right? Freedom dream. But it whether or not we have the dollars, we still need to think about this. So how do we do servingness for all of our populations? And we have some federal dollars to do it with multiple populations. That's amazing, right? So I think Anapeasy is it's a cool dual designation to have. So I want y'all to think about how you're going to lean into it. And the profile of students that fall under the Anapeasy category is even more complex than Latine. Here, these data say 48 different ethnic groups underneath that big umbrella. For Latinx, it's 20 different ethnic groups. So we have even more complexities with 48 different ethnic groups that might be falling under the Anapeasy designation. And then we know as we disaggregate, some of those groups are showing greater inequities than others, right? So some of our Asian American Pacific Islander students have great inequities and great needs, and others we would say they're doing well, right? They don't need as much support maybe because they're doing well, right? So we need to put a little more support into other groups. So there's tons of things to think about. Now, I think about the way that the servingness framework, which I'm going to get into next, can work for both designations, because I think it can. And I have worked with a couple campuses that are dually designated, and we've looked at the ways that the servingness framework is multidimensional and therefore allows us to do work across the two designations. So this book, Hispanic Serving Institutions in Practice, Defining Servingness and HSIs, I wrote this book, I edited this book actually, and the folks that wrote the chapters in this book, were implementing at the time, and or still are, some of them still are, Title III and Title V grants. So those are the two streams that fall under the Higher Education Act where monies come from for HSIs. Title III tends to be STEM focused, and then Title V can be much more broad, often focus on whatever the federal government decides the priority is for that year. So Title V and Title III directors are the ones that wrote these chapters. So some really cool things that came out because it was the work that was being done in practice. I'm going to highlight some of the really innovative things that were going on. Also wanted to share a slide. If y'all got the slides now with the QR code, these are some different resources to help you keep thinking about servingness. So if you're like, all right, I want to learn more about servingness. This is how we should be doing our work. This is equity and HSIs. Okay, I'm on board, right? Because that's how, like I said, we're really thinking about it. But if I had to define servingness, it would be anything beyond enrollment, right? I say here enroll and educate, but really it's anything beyond enrollment because, like I said, the idea of Hispanic enrolling doesn't feel good to anybody. Right? That's the biggest criticism of HSIs is like, if you don't do anything different, you're only enrolling a large percentage of Latinx students, you're not doing anything with them, right? So what are we doing beyond enrollment? How do we center the identities and the cultural ways of knowing of our students? That's huge, right? Thinking about who they are, the humanness, right? My comment about like my hoops, like, oh, wasn't wearing my hoops. And now I'm not who I want to be. I'm not holistic suddenly, right? Like we want people to feel like they are their whole selves, right? When they show up, and that we acknowledge that and that we can engage with that in the educational space. Transforming organizational structures is what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about. And then I'll talk a little bit about the outcomes, some of the outcomes we can use to measure. This is the actual model that came out. The article, the original article where we conceptualized this model of servingness, me and my colleagues, Anne-Marie Nunez and Vanessa Sanson, we proposed this as the model, as the framing, right? As how you can think about it in both research and practice. Now, the way you can think about it is anything in the oval, this is the college or the university, right? This is y'all. So anything in here, there's a lot of words, you probably can't see them, I can't see them, and I'm close. I mean, I can, but they're little. But anything in the middle, in the oval, that's what y'all do. So servingness, the way I think about it is that anywhere, no matter what your place is on campus, you can do servingness. And this is a personal one for me. I get really emotional and I really think about my own work as a Title V director, because I remember being a Title V HSI grant director and nobody really caring about HSI besides me and the one other person who was funded full-time by that grant. And so a lot of the work that I do has been thinking about how does an entire campus embrace a designation that is an entire campus. It didn't say that one program is Hispanic service, the whole campus is. The whole campus is. So how do you make the whole campus embrace this idea? So the oval is basically anywhere that you are on campus that's servingness. So how many of y'all teach? How many of y'all teach at least one course? Okay, most of y'all, right? The classroom, that's where you do servingness. So some of the examples I'm going to give, you're going to be like, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me because I don't do that. Although I know y'all have, shared governance practices. So a lot of y'all are going to, some of those things you do, like serve on committees and boards and different things. But your sphere of influence, if you're in the classroom with students, is the classroom. That's where you want to think about, well, am I doing servingness? How am I doing servingness? Right? Is servingness happening in this classroom? Is it happening for our Latinx students? Is it happening for our AAPI students? That's your sphere of influence. How many of y'all are in other spaces like support services maybe, or administration, making big decisions? All right, y'all all have to do servingness as well. So it looks different in each space, and I'll give different examples in each space, but that's the space where you step into this work. All right, so you step into this journey of servingness, as I say on the podcast, right? I have all the guests tell me their servingness journey, meaning when did you first become aware of HSI? And where are you at now with that understanding? Because it's a long process of coming to understand servingness. So y'all, those of you that didn't know HSI, when I started speaking, this is day one of your servingness journey. And now you're on a journey and you're going to start thinking, how do I think about this more? How do I think about this as a large organizational construct? And how do I do it within my sphere of influence, which whatever it is on campus, that's where you do servingness. So that's what that oval is basically anything we do. But some of the things that are in there is like your mission and value statement. Is it in there? Do we commit to doing this work in our mission and value statement, diversity plans, HSI grants, and our NFPZ grants, institutional advancement activities, engagement with the Latino community, compositional diversity of faculty, staff, and administration, culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy, programs and services for students, leadership and decision-making, incentive structures. Are people promoted for doing servingness? Because that would be the incentive structure, right? Like, do we get raises and we get promoted? Do we have to answer a question about how we're thinking about our HSI identity? Most places don't have that, but that's the dream. That's my freedom dream. Is like at some point, if you really want to engage in this work, you would have to ask people, for one, when they get hired, why do you want to work at an HSI/ANAPZ? Why do you want to work at a duly designated minority serving institution? Do you even know what that means? And that would be a question for every single person. Every faculty, every administrator, every person who comes into student services, every person who is maybe working the grounds, right? All folks on campus are part of servingness. I had some women at one campus one time tell me that the person who they felt like that supported them the most on campus was actually the woman who cleaned their residence hall. So to undermine the fact that everybody on campus is actually contributing to this work we can't, right? We can't undermine that because that work does matter. I was like, oh, this hit my heart, right? She was like, she gives us food. She speaks to us in Spanish. She feels like my mom, and she's the person who's cleaning the residence hall. And I saw some head nods, and some of it might be the person who, comes, takes your trash out, right? Like the person who actually says hi to you every morning, right? That's some of our folks who are out there doing good work, making sure we have good campus to do serving this work on, right? And to do this great work. So every single person is part of this process. Now, these boxes down here, these are what we call indicators for serving. So once you change structurally what you're doing, you got to be able to measure it. Now, I will say that everything in the middle is what I call the academic outcomes. Oh, let's go back. These are the academic outcomes, which are what I call normative. These are the things we care about the most in higher ed. These are the things we actually talked about in that report because they're the ones that we actually could find data for in Data Mart. So the normative outcomes are the ones that there are data available because we actually, we think about them at that level and that much. So it might be GPA, it might be semester to semester persistence, it might be transfer, it might be graduation, it might be any number of those things that might be your academic outcomes that are more normative, right? That we care about, and we care about whether you're an HSI or not. Some of the other ones, the non-academic outcomes, these over here, these are the ones that colleges and universities historically have provided things for students that are beyond the normative outcomes. So not only do we graduate students, not only do students get certificates, not only do they get credentials here, but when they hear and they interact with y'all as educators, they get other things. There's a lot of research that says that. As a scholar of higher ed who's been studying this kind of work for a long time, and I've studied college student development, we know that's in colleges, students maybe the first time they ever see a teacher that looks like them, maybe a teacher or instructor who allows them to read a book that speaks to their lived experiences. Maybe they might read a book by Bell Hooks or Gloria Anzaldúa for the first time here, because K through 12 has not done as good of a job of doing that, right? We see the K through 12 system trying to now mandate ethnic studies, which is great. But for the majority of students, a lot of students, the first time they ever get to really start to think critically in those sort of ways around their racialized identities is in some of your classes, because you have more autonomy, right, than let's say the K through 12 curriculum K through 12 teachers have. So you have the ability to think about how you're going to serve students beyond those academic measures, right? And the critical consciousness is one of my favorites. I talk about it all the time. Over here is validating experiences and then also racialized experiences, which the reality is there's a lot of racism that still happens in HSIs, and we need to address it. And I want to talk about it a little bit more. I'll share some resources on it, but that is real. Just to say there's a lot of people of color on campus doesn't now mean that racism no longer lives here. Because that's not why racism lives here. It's because systemically, white supremacy is the reason racism lives here. And it creeps its head in wild ways, all kind of wild ways, and has nothing to do with individual people to people liking each other. It has to do with much bigger systemic things. And so we got to address that, right? We got to think about how it shows up, and we have to think, was that racism? Was that, a microaggression? And how are we going to make sure we don't let that happen again, right? Because they happen all the time. Another way to think about this, I like to give folks, a more like tangible way. So everything in the oval, that's the structure. If we alter the structure, how are we going to measure it, right? So for example, we say things like, we want to provide faculty training. We do this in grants, by the way, in the HSI and ANAPESI grants. We're going to provide faculty training that is anti-racist and social justice. Now, the next thing that comes out of that is it says, it's then going to increase transfer rates and graduation rates. Y'all laugh because you know exactly where I'm going, right? I'm like, really? One training? That's a wonderful training. I offer trainings all the time, and I don't think I get anywhere near advancing graduation rates. But we do that, right? Why? Because the federal government wants us to increase graduation rates. They want the normative, right? And I say, well, why don't we say, if we do that, let's hope that it decreases microaggressions in the classroom and or increases simultaneously the critical consciousness of our students, right? Those are measurable, actually, right? They're all measurable. All the non-academic or the liberatory outcomes are measurable. And then we can show success in our work. We're like, yeah, we implemented a training. We did a year-long effort. And at the end, we found that students were reporting lower level of microaggressions and interactions with faculty in the classroom. That's amazing. They also showed some increase in their critical consciousness, right? That's cool. Now, what the data and the research would show us is that is correlated with them eventually graduating and moving on and transferring. So they're mediator outcomes, right? So how do we start to do this work smaller and not dream so big all at once and say, we know that ultimately doing these small things is going to make a big difference in the long run. The research is pretty clear on that students that are more engaged on campus are more likely to persist and more likely to graduate, right? So how do we keep them engaged? We do things that actually is meaningful to them, right? And right now, Gen Zs that are coming in, they're hard to engage, right? We know that. It's a whole nother beast of student. Like, how are we going to engage Gen Zs? They are all a whole nother level, right? And so we got to think critically about some of that stuff. So that's what I give you with those outcomes, and I'll give you a few more. Is like, how do we measure this work incrementally, one by one, before we get to graduation, which we know is the ultimate goal, or transfer, right? Either of those is good. So some of the structures for surveying, let's get into it. This comes out of the book. This is a chapter that was written by some folks at Cal Lutheran University, and they talked all about their HSI branding and how they became committed to HSI. And some of the things they did was they changed their strategic plan, that they were, make sure that it was in the strategic plan, that we were actually working towards becoming HSI. They launched a task force, which is something I always say is like, get a group of folks working on this, right? It shouldn't just be the work of the Title V office, right? So yes, are they going to be in it? Absolutely. You could also do this with your ANAPESI, right? When I worked with Ohlone College, and they were working towards dual designation. They did them simultaneously. They did one committee. They didn't do ANAPESI committee and HSI committee. They did one committee, which I would recommend, right? They did one committee, one task force to think simultaneously. And I say that because what we see, this is where white supremacy creeps in, is there starts being competition between groups. And so it's like, well, who's ever leading that one, they're just, they're having more meetings on the books. That's all. And this one isn't meeting as often. So that one's making more progress. It has nothing to do with the fact that we care about one group over the other, right? So how do we get this work happening simultaneously, right? So the task force can be really good about how we're going to engage in some of this HSI ANAPESI work. Developing policies to recruit and retain faculty of color. That's huge. I'll show you the faculty numbers. Hopefully yours are a little different, but in the report, we found that there's still a very high percentages of white faculty. Not that white faculty can't do this. Actually, white faculty need to do this critical justice work because we're not kicking folks out. But we also know that the data are pretty clear that students of color, they like to see themselves in the faculty. Right? And faculty are likely to do more of the culturally relevant practices and more likely to mentor students of color and engage with them in different ways. So there's reasons why we do want to continue to change the faculty diversity. And then engaging with other organizations. There's tons of organizations that are supporting this work. So definitely don't shy away from that. So here's the data, the faculty data. This is national data. The yellow boxes are the number of white faculty at HSIs on average. So it's anywhere from 66% to 75%. Almost the opposite of the student population, because our student population at HSIs tends to be about 10 to 15% white, whereas the faculty are 70% white, right? And like I said, not that white folks can't do this, so they got to go away, but this is important, right? This is such a high priority for folks of how are we going to change the faculty composition so that it matches the students. The ratios on the side, the white faculty to white student, a white student at an HSI is more likely to have a faculty member who looks like them than a Latinx, Latine faculty, basically is what those ratios say. White faculty to white students is 1 to 10, and Latinx faculty to Latinx students is 1 to 146. Now, what that also creates is a lot of pressure on faculty of color. And the faculty of color in the room are shaking their heads because now the 146 all need that person. They want that one person to support them and help them, right? And then the thing is, those of us that are in those spaces where we are the 1 or 2 people of color, faculty of color, we want to support those students, so we do. And we take it on, and it gets overwhelming, and we start just doing that tax, right? That tax work that happens, but we do it because we care a lot, right? And so there's reasons why these numbers do need to change, right? So it's something we need to think about is how are we serving this into our calls for new faculty, right? How do we start to put it in the when we send out a new, we have a faculty hire, does it say in there that we're an HSI and an Anapesi? Does it ask people to write a statement about what that actually means, right? What rather than a diversity statement is like, no, actually, do you know what it means to be at this kind of campus? Do you know what implications it has for your teaching? Because it does, right? The people who are in the classroom, it has major implications. So yeah, we could put that in our calls, right? For for new positions, right? Our postings, our job postings. We can put it out there as we start to recruit new folks. Now, the faculty and staff, we don't have solid data, but the staff and the administration tend to change a lot faster. This is actually the third community college I've been to this week in California, and all three were presented as Black males. You're my representation. That's what I take on you, right? You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but all three presented as Black males, right? That's amazing, right? That we have Black presidents at community colleges, right? That's wonderful. Yes, absolutely. Snaps and all that to that. We also have Latinas who are becoming some pretty phenomenal Latina presidents in the California community colleges, and they're pushing the bar. Right? They really are. So we need administrators of color, absolutely, right? But we also got to think about faculty because, yeah, the staff and the administration tend to change a lot faster. Now, I like to talk about the graduate enrollment at HSIs because this is pretty powerful for people because graduate enrollment affects who's going to be our future presidents and our future faculty, the people who we want to look different. Now, the reality is what me and my grad student found with this study was there was a difference. This green line here is undergraduate Latinx students, and this is graduate Latinx students at HSIs. This is the difference by 2015. So you see undergrad grew tremendously. I heard some ums, and grad didn't, right? And this is at HSIs. So the campuses, the Hispanic Serving Research institutions that tend to be the places where there's big graduate programs, they're very white still at their graduate level. Now, why does this matter? Because these are the folks who are going to come into our future positions, yet folks of color are not entering graduate school, right? And so that's what really for us came out of this. It's like, well, one, if you're a graduate HSI, which there are some that I speak to, you've got to look at this, or you got to think about the fact that your graduate programs are probably not as diverse as your undergraduate, right? So don't get that twisted because you're still white at the graduate level. But for us that are maybe at a place where there's not graduate programs, is to start thinking, how do we build a graduate going culture for people of color? Because part of that is that we're talking about first generation of college students who are entering HSIs and Anapesis who might not know what a graduate degree is. And so for us to assume that they're going to get out of here, they're going to transfer, they're going to get a degree, they're going to do what they're going to do, and know magically how to go to graduate school one day is a false idea, right? It's a false way to think. So how do we start to build right? You ask your students like, where are you going to transfer to? Cool, where are you going to get a PhD? They're going to be like, I wasn't going to get a PhD, but the minute you ask them that, they're now thinking about it. I mean, it's that one little easy little sprinkling of it, right? And so how do we sort of even build a graduate culture? That to me is HSI. That to me can be Anapesi. That like not only are we lifting our students up, building up their academic self-concept, but we're also building a graduate going culture. And we're getting them to understand that we do need more people of color in graduate programs. The Latinx, Latine graduate enrollment is dismal. This is HSIs only at predominantly white institutions that look like this as well. Although a lot of Latine folks do enter predominantly white institutions to get their graduate degrees. And it's still, the numbers are still dismal, right? So how do we start to change this, even at a place where we might not have any graduate programs? The curriculum is another space where we talk about transforming HSIs, right? How do we transform the curriculum? Remember I said, those of you that are in the classroom, that's your sphere of influence. This is where you got to start thinking, all right, what am I doing? And what does she want me to do? So this actually is a really cool example that comes out of the book. This is an example from UC Santa Cruz. And what they found was that their entry-level math course, their algebra course, was a place where students of color and all students actually were entering and not getting out, right? They were losing their aspirations for STEM in that algebra course. They called it a dumping ground in the chapter. They say it was a dumping ground for our future STEM students, and we want it to be a launching pad for our STEM students. And And so they worked specifically on that curriculum. And what I love about this chapter, and I talk about it all the time, is that they didn't say, well, that class, everybody fails because all those students, they're underprepared. They went to bad schools. They're not meant to be in STEM. Their families don't like college. All of those excuses that we make about the student, they didn't say any of those. They said, what's wrong with the course? And that's what faculty, those of you that are faculty, I'm a faculty member, I'm in group, so I can say this, that's what we don't do enough of. Say, what's wrong with my course? So when you look at the data, and the data are showing you that half of your students are getting D's or F's or withdrawing, and all of those are students of color, there's something wrong with your course, not the students. Not the students. We need to acknowledge that the students that enter the community college, they're entering as they are, and we need to embrace them and wrap ourselves around them and hug them and support them. Because there's also been educational systems that have beaten them up all along the way as it is, right? Already they're gotten here and the educational system may not have been good to them. What if this was the first place that it was good, that it was liberatory, right? Absolutely, you can clap for that. And so that's what I like about their chapter is they said, what's wrong with the course, not what's wrong with the students. If that comes out of your mouth, or anybody in your faculty meetings, when you go to faculty meetings next week, because we do this all the time at all colleges and universities. We immediately want to blame the student. What's wrong with the student? What's wrong with the student? We got to fix the student. What's going on with them? What's going on with them? Instead of what's going on with us. If you've ever read the Equity Walks, Equity Talks book, they talk about this exact thing. They basically talk about how faculty will look at their disaggregated data and they'll blame everything else besides themselves. They'll come up with all the reasons why the data say what they say instead of saying, well, maybe I need to do things differently because I've been doing stuff the same and I haven't thought about the fact that these students are more diverse than they've ever been and they have more challenges than they've ever had and they look different than they've ever had. Like all of those things need to come into play, right? And so that's what I like about this chapter. I don't really talk about all the details of it. You have the slides, you can see, but some of the things that they did, right? That they flipped the classroom, they got TAs, they had advising within the course. I mean, they had all kind of stuff, right? And they did see outcomes change. But the reality was they decided that the course needed to be changed, not the students. And I will tell you, the lead author, she was one of those people on campus who was a grassroots leader and wanted to change things. And her whole department didn't want her to do this work. The math department didn't want her to do this work, and they basically ousted her. And the Title V team picked her up and paid her to do this work because she was the rebel of the group, right? They were like, no, nothing's wrong with the course. And she's like, the course sucks. I'm gonna change it and they're gonna pay me to do it. So deuces. And she left, right? She left the math department for a while. I think she's still connected. She still has an appointment there, but she started moving on to the grant work, right? Because the grant work was gonna let her freedom dream in the classroom. And her department wasn't letting her. So this is a lot of work. Those of you that are here and you're like, where are the people in my department? It's your job now to take it back to your department. And start thinking about this kind of stuff because this is the reality of changing the organization instead of changing the student. We can't change the outcomes if we focus on changing the student only. We got to focus on changing the actual campus. Who's calling me? False call. Internships. This one, this is another one of those structures and this is now getting out of the classroom. Right? So classroom might be one if you have internships, or let's say we require our students. What I like about this example is we might say, you know what? The research shows that internships are really good for students, right? We also do this with like community engagement, right? Well, it's good, right, for our students to get civic engagement, right? We want that's a good thing. We want them to be engaged. And we say, now they have to do it, right, as part of our degree, except that we don't provide the opportunities for them to do it. And that's what internships, this article that came out of this open access journal that me and Marcela Cuellar had edited, was that students, even if they wanted to take internships, there was a variety of reasons why they weren't. Even though all of our research shows that internships are good, they might have said, well, my course load is too heavy, or they don't pay at that internship, or I can't find internships in my area. That's where we got to start thinking more critically. Is like, if we ask students to do something, but then we're not providing any support for it, like we can't ask them to do it. Right? For art, for example, that was one of them that like art students were like, there's no internships in art, right? So you can tell me I have to take an internship, yet there's none. So college or university need to provide that. That's a structure for serving students, right? And that will lead to greater outcomes. We know internships will lead to greater outcomes, particularly career advancement, but we have to provide it structurally. And so I like that one. This final example here in the structures for serving, this also comes from UC Santa Cruz. UC Santa Cruz, when they got their Title V and Title III grants, they were great about assessing what was going on. They were like, well, what's going on, right? What's going on with the campus? They asked some students, and students reported high level of microaggressions in their advising sessions. I love when y'all, the advising sessions. I like that you said because I said too, because I have a degree in college student personnel, and I always think the student services side of the house is like, we do good work, right? We support students, it's faculty. And luckily I've been both, so I can blame both, but it's faculty, they're messing up students. But these data and what they found was actually that the advising session was where students were reporting having microaggressive experiences. And so then people are like, well, what does that look like in advising? It's microaggressive, so you might not see it, right? So an example I give that most people are like, okay, maybe a counselor or advisor saying, don't take that class. Don't take that math class. It's going to be hard. Don't take that one. Take this other one, right? Sounds like you're helping. Sounds like you're being supportive. Yet the student might be saying, are they saying that because I'm a Black man? Are they saying that because I'm a Latina? Are they saying that because fill in the blank, right? Why do they think I can't succeed? I can succeed. I did good in math, right? And so all these things might be going through their head. And that's just an example. It could have been a many of number of things. But even when we think we're supporting them, right? And you might have been saying, if you're a counselor, you might have been saying that because you're like, that class is at 8 a.m. Are you sure? Right? 8 a.m.'s early. Rather than saying, it looks like you might not succeed in that class, right? But maybe that's how they took it. Right. So just even acknowledging that how our words that come out and how people might interpret them, right, based on who they are, and just changing a little bit, right? People often ask, well, what does it look like to affirm? Because what they talked about this was a conference. They launched a conference, microaggressions and how to be microaffirming. And they talked about how do you affirm people in mild, discrete ways rather than aggressing them in mild, discrete ways. How do you acknowledge and notice when you do the microaggressions, and then how do you then microaffirm them? So I really like that example because it does then give us all these different ways that serving this has to happen across campus, right? And there's tons of examples. I read articles all the time. This one I got from an article about, so the Anapesi work, those of you that are working with the Anapesi side of the grants maybe on campus are thinking, well, how do we get more data about Anapesis? They're doing a lot of similar work. When I read the Anapesi work as HSI, so one of them, this article that I cited here, and there's tons of articles, but they talk about the lack of communication and or understanding of Anapesi. And that's the reality with HSIs too, right? That people often are like, I don't know what that is, right? So how can I do this if I don't know what it is? So this article, the community colleges that they worked with, that was a big finding, was that people were like, I don't even know what MSI is. I've never seen it anywhere. There was one announcement that we got a grant, but that was it. Right? We never actually fully embraced this work. And then this idea that we have to learn new things to be an Anapesi or an HSI or both, right? That we have to do things differently in order to do this, right? And responsibility turned to commitment. What I like this article is they talk about the different administrators on campus and faculty who were not identifying as AAPI and really being like, I had to learn about the group first, right? And now get to commit to being an Anapesi, right? And that's justice work. We do justice work because it's the right thing to do, not because it's our group that we're a part of. Right? Because that's all often the folks that are doing the most work is like, if you're a part of that group, you're driving it. But if we want to be good allies and good co-conspirators in justice work, we got to do the work whether we're part of the group or not. Right? And that's the reality of both HSI and Anapesi. So how are we going to do this in critical ways and start to know that this is a responsibility to serve our communities, right? And depending on which communities are the largest here and which ones need the most support to do that work. So the indicators of serving, let me check my time. The indicators of serving are those, like I said, those little ways you can measure, right? The whether or not you're doing servingness work. And so academic outcomes, this is the, like I said, normative way, right? These are the things we generally know that we need to do better of. I'll give another advising example. This also comes from the book, and this was from a community college. And the author, what she did was she launched an intrusive advising session or intrusive advising program, and she looked at the difference between the students that got intrusive advising, that more hands-on advising, versus those that didn't. And what she found was that ones that had the intrusive advising actually persisted at greater rates from semester to semester. Right? They were more likely to be enrolled in October for the spring than students who didn't have the intrusive advising. And that's a pretty powerful finding, right? But it also gets to my point about us measuring this stuff semester by semester, right? And we know that persistence, semester to semester persistence actually is a really important indicator, right, of those ultimate long-term academic outcomes. But how do we measure this, right? When we're like, all right, we're going to try this thing. We got an HSI grant. We're going to try this intrusive advising. How are we going to measure it? Okay, let's measure it on whether or not they enrolled the next semester rather than measuring whether or not they graduated in 3 years, right? We can look at the semester to semester stuff. So that's part of this work, right? Is just being creative with like, all right, what are we doing? What should it do ultimately in the long run? But what can it do in the short term, right? How do we do this short-term stuff? The indicators of surveying, these are the non-academic or liberatory outcomes, right? These are the ones that I said, this is what colleges and universities are good at. Historically, we do this kind of work, but we do have to be intentional in some of it. Academic self-concept is a big one. Remember I said that some of our students and our students of color in particular may come in already kind of beat up from the educational system. Academic self-concept, Dr. Marcela Cuellar, actually, one of her articles, she wrote about how at HSIs, students are more likely to have an increase in their academic self-concept at HSIs than non-HSIs. And that's important. That means that we're doing a good job at HSIs to support students and to say, you're smart, right? You can do this, you can excel. That's that microaffirmations, right? And it does increase their academic self-concept. Social justice orientation, being committed to social justice, critical consciousness. Anybody that's ever taken, let's say, an ethnic studies course or maybe a gender and women's studies course, that's typically the outcome of a course like that, right? The critical consciousness goes up. We now understand the world through systems of oppression and how we can do something about it. Identity development, that's a big one. College student development research, like I said, I've studied a lot of that research, says that students do develop their identities while in college. That maybe the first time they got here, this is the first time when they got here, they ever got to explore who they were as people. And that might be race to people, that might be around gender, that might be their queer identity. Could be a number of things, right? That they actually explore what that identity means. So that's an important outcome. Yet the federal government isn't giving federal grants to do these outcomes. Although, believe me, I keep pushing them. I'm like, let's explore how we can do different types of measures of experiences that aren't just that ultimate final one, which is graduation or transfer or graduate enrollment, right? There's a number, or getting a job. Those things take time. Mental health and well-being is on here. The federal government did prioritize mental health and well-being in this round of Title V grants, which is good. I like that because now they're acknowledging that that does matter, right? And we all know that. We've been having those conversations about people's mental health and well-being does affect their ability to be here. I'm going to skip that one, make sure I get to the experiences. Remember I talked about experiences? This comes from Laura Rendon, has been talking about validation in the classroom for a long time, since like 1994, at least back to 1994. And Laura Rendon says that students do need to feel validated in the classroom. And that comes in cultural validation. They need to see themselves, those books, those assignments, whatnot, need to be centered on their ways of knowing, but also academic validation. That we need to be encouraging our students that they are academically good and academically going to excel in school, right? In college while they're with us. So the validating experience is important. This article I recently read, I was like, oh, let's add this to my slides because this gets at the intersectionality. Remember I talked about intersectionality, how we have to be really intentional about thinking about our students' intersectional needs. This one is about LGBTQIA students at HSIs. And the reality is some of these things that they talk about, the themes that came out of this one was that your queer Latina students say things like, we encountered isolation and alienation when we got there. Not because of their Latino identity, because they're at an HSI, but because of their queer identity. That even people within the community, within the Latina community, might be the ones that are help making them feel like that, right? Isolated or alienated. Second theme was living with and against traditional gender norms, that we're still struggling to, embrace gender things outside of the gender binary, right? That there is much more ways to be, to show up in your gender, and it's very fluid. But that people are still reporting that that's not being fully accepted in spaces, and particularly in community of color spaces. And so they talk about that. And then they also talk about, but there are some affirming environments and individuals, right? So some of y'all are doing a good job about this, but we got to make sure we're doing better so that our students aren't reporting these sort of things, right? That they're having intersectional microaggressions, that they're like, I feel really good in this one way, but not in this other. One of my students, she did her dissertation with Latina students with disabilities, both physical and psychological, emotional disabilities. And she found this exact thing, that students were like having to, okay, let me go over here to get support with my disability, but let me go over there to get support as a Latina student, but that they weren't getting it at both. And she did this social network analysis that showed that students were very likely to go to disability services for support in that way, but that everybody in that space was a white person. So it wasn't anybody that they were connecting with in their cultural ways or their race ways. One of our participants actually identified as Afro-Latina. So even in their race and their ethnicity, they weren't having that experience. But then they also talked about having more support for their families, for their physical disability, and less support for their needs, like their mental health needs. That their Latino families were not as supportive of that. Like, that's not real. You don't need a therapist. Those kind of things that do happen sometimes in communities of color. And so they're forced to like, where do I get support, right? They're getting support in different ways rather than being able to be holistic when they show up. So how do we make sure we're holistically supporting students, right? When they show up. The indicators of not serving, this is the one that I said, racialized experiences are real. And I'll show you the next slide. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 articles that have recently come out that you can access when you access the slides, look more closely at the slides. These are articles that are showing the racialized experiences that various groups are having at HSIs. Black folks, Asian American folks, Native folks, Latina folks, having racialized experiences at HSIs. So again, racism doesn't just go away once you have a lot of people of color because of white supremacy. And so this is an important conversation of like, how do we start to disrupt invalidating of racialized experiences? I'll give you another example from this week. I like to give like current examples. When I'm visiting y'all, I get so much like from just the visit. One faculty member, white male presenting, was like, I'm a hippie, I went to school at Berkeley, I accept everybody, I'm super liberal, blah, blah, we don't need to talk about that. And a black woman in the back raised her hand so high, and I was like, I think your colleague has something to say. It's like, I'm not going to even respond to that because I got all kind of things too. And that person was like, listen, when my colleagues don't even acknowledge me as a faculty member, what do they think they're doing to students? Right? So all this I'm liberal hippie stuff, like that doesn't mean racism ain't here. Right? We can be all these different things. It actually has nothing to do with your political affiliation, right? Whether or not racism continues to live here. So that was powerful. I was like, oh, okay, I'm done. Opening up some cans of worm, right? So we do need to acknowledge that these things are happening, right? And racism and microaggressions happen in so many ways, and we need to start acknowledging them and preparing for how we're going to not do them. I want to make sure I give y'all some time to ask me any questions. I'm not going to go through any of these, but I do want to show you the what those slides were was actually the external influences, which is this box over here, which is like, how do we respond to the federal government or the state environment when the state is saying things? This is particularly relevant in a state like Texas right now, right? Where they're like, DEI is being attacked. How do we still do HSI work, right? Y'all are in a state that's a little more friendly when it comes to those sort of things. It doesn't mean you always will, though. And I like to make sure we warn us not to get too comfortable, because all it is just one little change of political affiliation and who's in power, right? And it could be happening here. The same thing we're seeing happening in Texas. So that matters because it makes HSI work harder, right? When our external influences, our governments are saying, no, we don't believe in this stuff, right? Nobody was ever enslaved. That was what do they say? Training program or something? Yeah, like, yeah, it's skill development. What? Yeah. Those people that said that, they need an ethics studies course. The courses that they don't want colleges and universities to offer. Yeah, they need that course. But yeah, so when the government is saying those sort of things, we're like, nah, like we're gonna still do this work. So you have to work against those. So that's what the external influences are. The corporations and hiring, I added some of these boxes. These are things that aren't currently in the framework, but all of them are happening at HSIs. And so starting to think about it, like one that's important is the family support. Right? It's not in the framework, but we have to start engaging with our families, right, in order to do this work. Families are a huge part of our students, right? They don't leave their families and never go back, right? That's a very old Tinto way of thinking, that people leave their families and never go back and they get disconnected. So how are we engaging our families, our communities in this sort of work? How are we measuring this? How are we doing outreach and recruitment around this idea of serving this? I want to make sure I offered that, and even added systems of oppression here, because it is more than race. There's patriarchy coming in, heteropatriarchy. There's different systems that are working against us if we want to do equity and justice work in HSIs. So thank you very much for listening.
First of all, can we just give it? I told y'all you were in for a treat. Can we get about one more time for Dr. Gina Garcia? I am going to have the mic available, and I'll gladly walk over to you for a quick question for Dr. Gina Garcia.
Or comment. You can also give comments if you have any responses.
Thank you, and that was a wonderful presentation. My question was about, we talked about multidimensional conceptual framework and the non-academic outcomes. Is there an assessment tool for that or survey already developed to see what that could look like in data?
Yeah, that's a good question. There isn't necessarily an assessment tool from the surveyness framework, but people ask that a lot because we don't know how do we measure that. So I often refer people to the ed psych literature. Educational psychologists have created scales for a lot of those. So if you're somebody who wants to measure it, so critical consciousness, for example, there are at least 5. You got a scale? Oh, they're the ed psych people? Oh, okay. Oh, so do y'all have those data? No. Okay, that's your job. That's your job, is to create the data. All right. I love the research folks, the institutional researchers. I am working with those folks to say, how can we start to get the measures? Because typically we have the normative ones. The one that folks typically will say, and y'all nod your head yes or no, is like, well, we have a campus climate measure, right? That one. Or maybe a sense of belonging. Either of those? No. Okay, that's it. Critical consciousness, definitely not. Identity development, definitely not. Social justice, political engagement, not there. And so, yes, we do need to be better with our institutional research, but you can access scales on your own. Let's say in a class, you're like, I want to measure this in a class. There are plenty of scales. Critical consciousness, a number of ed psych folks have created critical consciousness scales. Civic engagement scales are there. Identity development, racial identity development, queer LGBTQIA identity development, those scales exist. So we got to be a little creative. The other thing I will say is qualitative data are valid too. So people don't, yes, they don't, the researchers are like, see, yes, I told you. It doesn't have to just be in numbers. If people tell you their story, believe it, right? They can write their stories, storytelling, and storytelling comes, communities of color love to tell stories. We are storytellers by nature. So believe those stories as well when they talk about how they gained their critical consciousness in your class. That's a good measure. So I would encourage you to think about both. But now we have our institutional researchers who are going to get on it.
Thank you. We have a question for maybe one more question or comment from the audience. Don't you all jump on at once, please. I'm gonna have to take you down. Oh, we have one more. Thank you.
Just question. I saw some of your focus, but your focus on the mamas, the dadas, the people who are raising our little ones, and any good research to back that up would be great.
Yeah, no, that's an area I think we need to talk more about. Like I said, that came up yesterday at the conversation yesterday when I was at Compton College, about a number of our students are parents, right? Parenting students, and we're not doing a good job of serving them. And some of it is basic, we're not even providing adequate childcare, right? Or affordable childcare. And that's a big part of it. The Ed Trust, they published this blog piece or this practice brief maybe last year, and it basically showed that the cost of caring for a child might be greater than the cost of rent, right? Like it's that expensive. Yeah, and anybody that has had a tiny human, 0 to 5, they're very expensive to care for. So much so that one person just doesn't go to work, or you got like 3 grandmas. My niece is dealing with that right now. 3 different grandmas all watching the baby. So we shuffle the baby all around because at least we have 3 grandmas who are willing. Because childcare could be the reason, right, that they're not coming. Some of the things they talked about yesterday was like, yeah, one camp actually earlier in the week, one campus said we're not allowed to bring children on campus. Because I made a comment about like, if a person's not showing up and you're like, why don't, you just ask them, why aren't you showing up? And they're like, I can't get childcare. And you're like, just bring them. Why bring them to class? And one campus told me that's a policy, actually. We can't. So understanding our policies before I say bring them to campus. But then yesterday they were saying, but we don't have good spaces, right? So we even have students in our student support, like let's say financial aid, they're in there trying to get help. And like, could we just set up a little table for kids, right? Just to keep them entertained while, the parent does what they got to do. So I think we need to start thinking about that, right? How do we start to better serve our students and understand that's the humanness, right? And that instead of us saying, what's wrong? How come they haven't come to class for 4 weeks? Acknowledging that it might be because they're caring for a number of people. It might be elderly, it might be their parents, it might be a number of things. So I think we need to do better. I don't have any good resources. Not to say they're not out there, but yeah, for sure. I hope that the conversation will continue because we need it, right? Assessing that some of our students are in those spaces. So thank you.
One more time, give it up. Thank you so much. And I just want to give a quick, on my own personal shout out to Mikasa, APITA, and the PD research committee, program department, Sabrina, and everybody else who's behind us to give us this treat of having Dr. Gina Garcia here. So thank you all so much. Should I introduce you? Our interim director, Jose Gonzalez. Sorry, for Mikasa.
While they set up the slide, buenas tardes. I would say buenos dias, but it's pretty close to lunchtime. So buenas tardes, everyone. I'm glad I got to respond back in Spanish. That means that we are in HSI. All right, everyone. So it is my honor to present the Latinx Servingness journey at CRC. Again, my name is Jose Gonzalez, and I'm the interim director for Mikasa. So I'm going to introduce the folks that are not here, and then the folks that are here, I'm going to allow them to come up and introduce themselves. So first, for Mikasa, I would like to introduce Daniela Cepeda, who is the Mikasa counselor. Ruby Mendoza, she's going to be introducing herself later in the student panel, but she's our first Mikasa navigator. Liliana Mendoza, who is our Puente adjunct coordinator and counselor. And Dr. Ray Mepeso, our Puente HCD 310 instructor and counselor. Back up with her.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Jose Alfaro, English faculty, and this is my second semester as the Puente English instructor and co-coordinator.
So first and foremost, I would like to recognize the Puente program. That was our first program that was here supporting Latinx students. And that was led by Dr. Ray Mapeso and Professor Priscilla Hansen back in fall of 2005. Priscilla, would you please stand up? Everybody, a round of applause to Priscilla. And just a little background story with that. Priscilla was a former instructor of mine for English Puente, as I was part of cohort 4. And also Ray Mapeso, he was also my counselor for Puente. If it wasn't for Ray's dedication and just cariño on every counseling appointment, I would probably not be here speaking to you all today. So thank you, Ray. The labor of love that Puente has shown, the amor, has increased the Latinx enrollment here at CRC, which allowed us to get HSI designation. Back in fall of 2020, we were fortunate and honored to receive our HSI designation and also our DHSI grant. And that's where year 1 began for Mi Casa. And back in spring of 2022, we were able to collaborate together with Puente and just create and elevate our services to all of the Latinx students that are here at CRC. So I would just like to say thank you, everyone, for being a support to the HSI community. And like Gladys was saying, we're all in HSI, and we're going to share a little bit more about our services.
Buenas tardes, everyone. I hope we're digesting all that good information. Thank you, Dr. Gina Garcia, for presenting your framework and informing our campus about what being HSI is. So a little bit about our advancing CRC's definition of servingness. We're going to touch a bit upon the Mi Casa services and how we implement that here at Cosumnes River College. So here at Mi Casa, some of the services that we do offer that can directly be supported for the students that are entering your classroom include access to counseling. We acknowledge sometimes there is a backlog in counseling. Sometimes they can't see someone soon enough, which can result in late registration, therefore adding another semester, delaying their transfer or graduation. So we do have Daniela, who is our Mi Casa counselor, readily available to go ahead and see students. In addition, we do have Success Coach. So for example, you're in your class and you see a student struggling with some questions that maybe are out of your range, send them our way. As a Success Coach, we're here to help and just get them connected to the resources that CRC has to offer. In addition, we have access to Chromebooks. So if you recognize a student struggling in your class that does not have a computer or access to complete the assignments for your course, please send them our way. This is our way of implementing that bridge from your classroom to our services, so we make sure the student has holistic support all around. In addition, we pride ourselves on our cultural workshops to make sure that we're providing culturally relevant information and information that is accessible to them and that they relate to. In addition, the center is the core for the community building. Just to mention some statistics, since its grand opening in fall of 2022, we have had over 900 visits and growing unduplicated in the Mi Casa Center. And it's just great to finally see the students back on campus, given that the grant was actually born during the time of COVID. So that was another thing we kind of had to, work through. But thankfully, we are at these amazing numbers, which have resulted in about 584 cohorted students thus far in year 3 of the cycle, which is an amazing number that we have been serving. And these students have gone on, some of them to transfer and graduate, and you'll get to hear from some of them in the panel as well. And we have also been able to up the transfer rate from 4.9 to 9%. So that's just slightly, where we're at right now as far as Mi Casa at a glance, and those are some of our services. In addition, for faculty and staff, we do offer professional development. So that is another way that you can engage with the HSI grant program here at campus at CRC. In addition, we just want to, serve that liaison between classroom and services, and also in the future, get thinking and planning, starting those conversations about what's going to happen once this grant term is over. It is a 5-year cycle. We're currently in that halfway point. So if y'all have any contributions or thoughts and ideas, please feel free to find us. We are located on the 3rd floor of the library. I know some of y'all stopped by on the tours on Wednesday, which was an amazing opportunity to get to see the space. But yeah, reach out to us if y'all have any other comments and concerns. Thank you.
Okay, if my teeth start chattering, it's really cold in here. Hopefully you can't hear it over the mic. I'm very excited to be a part of the Puente team. This is only my 2nd semester, but already I feel like I'm in this familia organization that is really welcoming. And we got to meet our cohort 20 yesterday, which was really nice. So we have, I think, 36 students who entered Puente. So Puente has been here for a while, but I think sometimes folks maybe aren't familiar with what Puente is. So the Puente model is you have an English instructor that they work with for the whole year. So they take English Writing 300 and 301 with me during their first year. And they also work with a counselor. And the counselor and I, we both co-coordinate events and make sure that students have adequate support throughout the semester. On a statewide level, Puente has changed its model. So Puente began as an organization that helped primarily Mexican American students. Then it expanded to be a Latine organization. And then recently, statewide, its model has shifted to become an intersectional hub in ways that I think are really important for creating cross-racial, cross-ethnic solidarity. So in my classroom, the way that looks like is I do talk about to students, how can you liberate yourself in your communities? But once you do that, how do you liberate people who do not look like you? And how do you commit to an investment and investing populations that are struggling more than you? And for me, in my own educational journey, the people who freed me and who really got me to start thinking about liberation were Black feminists. And so though I did not look like them, though my experiences did not necessarily match theirs, those were the thinkers that expanded my world. And so that's what I do in the curriculum and in the classroom. That's what Puente does in building familia. So I'll leave it there. And next we're going to have our student panelists come up here, and then we will introduce them and begin our discussion. Okay, so we'll start from here and then move that in that direction in the order of questions. Okay, so we'll have each of you introduce your name, your major, and when you were a part of Puente and or Mi Casa.
Hello, everyone. Say good morning too. Oh, it is good morning still. So my name is Alejandra Trejo. My major when I was here is sociology. Cohort 10. 10. I remember from the X from the shirts. It's cohort 10, yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Ruby Mendoza and I'm a film major. I'm a second year college student here and I was a part of Puente last year, so I was part of the cohort 19. And right now I'm working with Mi Casa as the Mi Casa navigator.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Barra. I am a bio major in interest for nursing. I was part of Puente last year. I was also part of the 19th cohort, and I'm currently a student at Mi Casa.
Hi, my name is Miguel Rioza. I'm a psych major, and I've been working with Mi Casa a lot in the past year.
Awesome. Thank you for introducing yourselves. So we'll engage in a little bit of in answering these questions, but if we have time, maybe the audience can also engage. I'd be interested in that happening. So our second question for the panelists, what was a barrier you faced as a Latinx student here at CRC?
I believe similar to other students' experiences that are coming back from or coming from first generation is the lack of knowledge. I feel like that's definitely something that we go to our parents in hopes to like for them to assist us in the whole process and in classes if we have for me I took a year gap right after high school, so I still kind of relied on my parents for a little bit of a, assistance in more in math because there was a language barrier as far as like English, but math was always something that I was able to go to my parents for. But as far as how to fill out paperwork for financial aid, how to register into classes, the whole transfer process, that was something that was brand new, like to me. So that was definitely a barrier entering to community college.
For me, like Alex said, I think the biggest barrier was the lack of guidance and support. Both parents didn't graduate high school; they only went up to middle school, so I didn't really have any guidance on what to do. I also took half a gap year, and I signed up for college in January, and I picked 3 random classes and didn't have any knowledge on what to do. So it was just I think the biggest barrier was the lack of support.
As previously said, the lack of not support but guidance from parents was a lot as a first generation student. Going into college kind of like blindly and not really knowing what to do was kind of intimidating. And also self-inflicted issues like imposter syndrome, thinking that I don't belong in like higher education. It was kind of intimidating just going there and like go to class, seeing people, knowing what they were doing, and I was just kind of lost, just doing things like off the whim. It was a little bit harder to do it well or think that I was doing it well.
I could definitely see how frustrating it was because, much like Ruby, my parents never got to high school. So, asking questions about financial aid or registering for classes and seeing how they had no experience with it was frustrating for them. And I didn't want to make them feel more at a loss. So, I needed any resources I could turn to.
Thank you for those thoughtful responses. So our next question for you all is, what services of Puente and or Mi Casa served as a resource for you?
Everything. No, literally. The Professor Hansen. I had Professor Hansen, and I had Ray also. Stella Hoskins, the counselor that was also there at the time. And definitely just the guidance for sure. The like was said earlier, the sense of family, community as well. And just like the different opportunities that like Puente provides, it goes further than just within the classroom. It's also getting involved in the club that really sprung me forward in like getting more involved in community college. Uh, you know, just putting myself out there. I was a really shy kid in like high school, so uh, you know, it brought me out of that shell, definitely.
For me, I the service I used a lot was the counselor, Liliana Mendoza. She's a really good counselor. She's always helpful, and she really guided me a lot through most of last year. I was always there asking her questions, and she helped me pick my major. Also, the HCD classes helped me pick my major. We took a lot of quizzes to like kind of discover what we like, just the options we have. And I always knew that I was really creative, but it kind of just validated that I wanted to be a film major. So I used those classes a lot. And the recently Mikasa had a summer transfer academy program with along with other programs, and I learned about the TAP, how to make the TAP account, and I learned about the tag process. And now I think I'm knowledgeable and know how to transfer, and I'm prepared to transfer.
For me as well, the guidance part of Puente Mi Casa has been a huge help to me. I've also used the counseling a lot, both for Mi Casa and Puente. Liliana, during my first year, was super helpful because she helped me literally through every step of the way, whether it was like signing up for classes or like networking through CRC to get help from different programs. She was a big help for me my freshman year because I switched majors and it was like a pretty big switch. I went from an English major to a pre-nursing major. So it was like a super big change in such a short amount of time, but she helped me get it all set in stone. And I was like ready my first year. Another was the success coaches. Melissa helped me a lot through like personal stuff or like things that were happening throughout the year. If I was having issues like academically, she would like refer me to the tutoring center or any of the things that would help me out just further be successful. Both programs just really help you be the best version of yourself. You can be both academically and just like as a person overall. So the support system was something that like really helped me be a better student.
I use the counseling office here at CRC very often, and they were a great resource. But there was always more like personal things, like long, in-depth things. Like I remember this year, I was able to come into Mikasa, and we went through my entire financial aid, and she was able to tell me what each part meant and how I was able to use that when I transferred. And then when I did actually transfer, and I got into the school of my choice, we were able to go through my awards for that school specifically. And I remember Melissa actually went to the same school that I got into, and she was able to give me her experience, which was so extremely helpful.
And our final question, what, if anything, do you wish CRC had to support Latinx students? How about in the classroom?
I would say maybe being a little bit more culturally relevant, like everyone's been saying, you know, tying in what's going on in society and maybe it might not show, but maybe students might be affected in whatever's going on, and it may be affecting their school as well. So definitely having that empathy for coming from professors, faculty, and staff to towards students.
I think a lot of people, a lot of students just aren't aware of the programs and the resources that are available to them. So I think something that could be helpful is maybe professors like bringing up the programs, being like bring awareness to the programs and the resources that they have available, because a lot of students just go to class and then go home, so they don't really know.
Yeah, I agree with Ruby. A lot of students don't acknowledge all of the resources and support services that they have available to them. They'll just know like the broad or like the bigger ones, and they won't really look into it and see ones that can specifically cater to their needs. But for me, I felt like being enrolled in both of those programs has helped me a lot already. But yeah, just further like announcing what we have for students would be a huge help.
I think about like how low the Latino demographic is in the medical field, and I think in school when you could get so unmotivated so easily, it's really amazing to be able to have culturally relevant stuff around you in school to motivate you to get that higher education, get into those fields, and ensure that later on the Latino demographic is able to get the care they need from people who understand them and understand their personal experience.
How are we on time? Any questions from the audience? Yeah. Yeah. I do have a mic. Gladys, do you want to? Yeah.
Scream really loud.
First, I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience. It's really, for me at least, it's super interesting and valuable to hear like real CRC students telling what was helpful to them and what was a struggle for them. It makes it kind of more real than statistics and things like that. And so my question is a little bit related to the last question you answered. But as a teacher, I'm always looking for specific things that I can do in the classroom. So my question is, can any of you share a specific practice or moment or something that you experienced in the classroom or instructor did that you'd like to see more of, or that you think everyone should do?
I can answer this. Professor Winnie Han. When I was in her ethnics class, I think it was the APIDA, or she took the class to the opening. So it was really, and everyone got to learn about the program. So it was really nice to have that.
I guess I'd just like to echo that, I work in the Center for Inclusion and Belonging where that was set. And, you're seeing professors bring their classes into that space and really, letting them know what services are here for the students is very nice to see, because it brings just this this warmness into the space. Um, and we know that all the services there are for for the students' success. So it's really great to have professors teach a class, communications class, go in there, do a presentation. I know one of the professors did that for their final, which was really neat to see the students in a different space, as far as like a different location rather than a classroom, but a different environment. So yeah, that's a definitely good space to utilize.
I'm not sure if this will really answer the question, but for me, including diverse content within the course, I got a Professor Alfaro for English, and he included a lot of literature that included diverse authors, like female Black authors, and it really opens your eyes to see that it's not just one specific demographic that's writing successful books and literature. So him including that just opened my eyes, and it's really reassuring knowing that the demographic that's not really shown as successful can be successful and can write literature that really impacts and opens your eyes.
I think it's really easy to get imposter syndrome when you're a student and when you don't see other people like you experiencing success. So I think having outlets like Mikasa and having your teachers know about Mikasa and providing those places for you would be really great.
I think we have one more question. Sorry, Trinity. I see.
It's okay. Thank you. Outside of Mikasa and Puente, how has CRC enhanced your experience here, or has it?
To be honest, I think what really has enhanced my experience is Mikasa and Puente, because before I would just go to class and go home, like I said. But with Puente, I made friends. I look forward to going to class now because I have friends to be with, and I, I don't. If I didn't go into Puente or Mikasa, I don't think I would be here. I think I would have dropped out, honestly.
For me personally, Mikasa and Puente have been that foundation for me to further branch out. And Liliana has helped me branch out. I'm part of the trio program as well. I'm a peer mentor there. And it's kind of having a family outside of the first family I had, because Puente and Mikasa are definitely a family that I know I have on campus. But recently being into trio, they're really inviting and a really helpful service. And also with faculty, I've made connections with them, specifically with Miss Pollock. She's helped me a lot within her classes. And just having that reassurance that knowing you have that support from outside, your initial programs is really nice. And it makes me want to come back to school with not a pessimistic mindset, but more an optimistic. And it helps me just further want to go to school more.
I think having, much like what Ruby said, I think it was really easy to not to just go to class and then go home. But I think once you form a sense of community, like Mikasa, it really inspires you to come to school, get your stuff done, and actually know what's happening, if that makes sense. Because I feel like a lot of being a first generation college student is being in the dark a lot. So knowing what you're doing, knowing where you're going is very inspiring and it's very great.
All right, and I think that concludes our panel.
Real quick, I just want to say thank you everyone for attending today's convocation. Also, September 15 to October 15 is Latinx Heritage Month. So please be in a lookout for our event, and hopefully you could all share this information with your students as well. Thank you.
All right, just a few more announcements before you make your way outside the door. First, I'd like to thank everyone who had a part in making this convocation journey a success. I had a list. I do not have the list here anymore of all those people that I was supposed to thank. So what I will do is I'm going to think of all those people right now. You know who you are. Do you feel me thinking about you? Thank you so much for all the work that you've done. I apologize for not being able to read all those names out, but you know who you are. We know who you are because every single convocation that you help put together is successful, and we walk away learning so much more than we did before. So a few other things. Someone dropped in the ladies' restroom some money. So if you think it's yours, please come up. Right, I know. If no one comes up, then we will donate this money to some program on campus. So they have an extra few dollars, okay? All right, we'll let there. Right? Yeah, right. Yeah, we could just program right here. And then I just want to say a thank you to our speakers today. I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Gina Garcia. Thank you so much. Your energy, your scholarship, your dopeness. Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to our student speaker earlier, the Student Senate President. She was fantastic. Our student panel, hearing your voices were amazing. We need to continue to do this work, and thank you for lending us your time and your energy so we could hear what you needed us to hear today. And so we have lunch that is going to be available for you outside in the AME courtyard. Remember, this semester and convocation is about communication. It's about connectedness. It's about community and conversations. Have a really great semester, and thank you so much for your time. You all did a great